At 12:45 p.m. on Saturday the 11th of February 2023, 16-year-old transgender teenager Brianna Jai left her home in the town of Birchwood in the county of Cheshire in the UK for the last time to go and meet her friend, 15-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson. When she arrived, she found that Scarlett had invited someone else, Eddie Ratcliffe, also 15 years old, who she'd never met. Little did Brianna know that she was walking into a trap, and that Scarlett and Eddie were obsessed with violence, with Scarlett particularly having aspirations of being a serial killer. They compiled a list of people they were going to kill to realise their fantasy, and Brianna's name was at the top. It later came out in court that Scarlett had likely already tried to kill Brianna by giving her an overdose of medication, and they had planned to kill her on 2 separate dates before the day she finally died. Brianna's heartbreaking final journey was captured on CCTV, showing her meeting her killers, who then took her to Colchis Linear Park, where they subjected her to a frenzied and savage attack, stabbing her 28 times. Brianna fought desperately for her life, but quickly succumbed to her injuries. Her body was found almost immediately by a couple who saw the pair running away. Just over 24 hours later, the police had both perpetrators in custody and had to go through a shocking collection of evidence, including handwritten notes and text messages, showing how long the pair had been fantasizing about killing someone, as well as the extent of their planning. Neither was shown any remorse for their crime. In fact, Scarlett told a psychiatrist that she found the act of killing exciting and wanted to do it again. Welcome to Evil Among Us. I return to this frequently. I will continue to do so as long as this channel is around. Show respect for the victim in this video and all my other videos. I think this is particularly important in this case, as Brianna was transgender, and I won't have her memory tainted with transphobic or homophobic comments. If you post these, then you'll be blocked from commenting on the channel again and reported to YouTube. I'm not speaking to 99.9% of my viewers, as you guys are awesome. I'm speaking to the 0.1%. What I say to them is that this video is about the murder of a child, pure and simple. If seeing the word transgender means that you suddenly feel less sympathy for Brianna and her grieving family, or God forbid that she deserved it, then you are the problem, and you really aren't welcome here. I wouldn't care if my subscriber count dropped to 0. I won't have Brianna or any of the other victims I cover disrespected. Also, whilst I really appreciate people sending me super thanks, on this video, please don't send me anything. If you have some spare cash, then please donate it to Brianna's GoFundMe memorial page, link in the description. This may have been taken down in the future, so I'll also leave a list of other charities that receive donations who give support to transgender people. So, Brianna Michelle Taylor Jai was born on November the 7th, 2006, in the county of Cheshire, which is in the northwest of England. She was born a boy called Brett, but came out as trans aged 14, and had been living and dressing as a girl from this point until the time of her murder 2 years later. And so, she will be addressed using female pronouns throughout this video. She was the daughter of Esther Jai and George Spooner. Esther is a remarkable woman, as will become clear during the video. She's compassionate, strong, and caring, and she fully supported Brianna in her journey. She also had a sister called Alicia, the pair were very close. Brianna didn't have the easiest time in life. She suffered from problems with her mental health, including anxiety, and she also had an eating disorder. After her death, friends and fellow pupils at the school she attended, Birchwood Community High School, stated that she'd been the subject of bullying and abuse for years, including being, quote, gang beaten, as well as having objects thrown at her and being the subject of disgusting verbal abuse. Despite this, Brianna was kind and loving. She always treated others with respect, even if others didn't extend her the same courtesy. After her death, her family described her as follows, quote, Brianna was a much-loved daughter, granddaughter, and baby sister. She was a larger-than-life character who would leave a lasting impression on all that met her. Brianna was beautiful, witty, and hilarious. Brianna was strong, fearless, and one of a kind. Brianna had social anxiety and turned to the internet for comfort. She had a TikTok account under the name of Ginger Puppy. She had 31,000 followers and would post videos dancing and lip-syncing to pop songs. Brianna was helping other people through their own transition, trying to make them feel less anxious and unsure of themselves, something she was struggling with herself. One of these followers said, quote, "She made me feel unstoppable as a trans girl and really pretty because she would never let me put myself down." However, despite her online following, Brianna was described as a lonely child, and her anxiety became worse as the years progressed, with her spending more and more time alone in the house. Things became extremely difficult for her when she had to readjust after lockdown. She'd made an effort to try and go out before this and be sociable, but the months of lockdown had meant that her fear of the outside world had increased. She persisted though and went to school, but struggled with social situations and crowded places, so she was educated in a much smaller class to help her adjust. Brianna's mother Esther was concerned that her child was lonely, and so was over the moon when in around October 2023, Brianna made friends with a girl who had just joined the school, 15-year-old Scarlett Jenkinson. However, Scarlett was a very dangerous child, someone who had been moved due to trying to harm a pupil at her previous school. She was also obsessed with violence, torture, and murder, and idolized serial killers whilst wanting to emulate them. Just 3 months after first meeting Scarlett, Brianna would be dead, murdered at the hands of her so-called new friend and her accomplice, 15-year-old Eddie Ratcliffe, again a deeply disturbed young man who had fancies about murder. I'll use the first names of the perpetrators in this case, as it makes things flow better. So only minimal details of the backgrounds of both Scarlett and Eddie have been released at the time of recording. I think this has been at the request of Esther Jai, so that their family is not targeted. I have found information about the family of both killers, but in line with how things have been reported so far, we'll not use their names. What we do know is that on paper, both of them had unremarkable and stable upbringings. What has been reported is that Scarlett Jenkinson was born in 2007 and spent her childhood in the village of Colchester in Cheshire. She and her 3 brothers were raised in a stable home by her mother and father, who were employed as a teacher and tradesman respectively. Both are described by people who knew them as, quote, hard-working and law-abiding. Scarlett was apparently a happy child. She had a keen interest in horse riding and would participate in competitions. However, Scarlett's behaviour began to change significantly when she was around 12 or 13 years old. She began wearing heavy makeup and would regularly take drugs, specifically cannabis, but occasionally cocaine. She also began to develop an unhealthy obsession with serial killers, particularly the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, but also Jeffrey Dahmer and Harold Shipman. She would write profiles on these killers, outlining their crimes in graphic detail, as well as writing about classification types of different serial killers. She would go on various gore websites and watch graphic videos of death and dismemberment, and eventually she downloaded software to allow her to access the dark web in her search for mythical red rooms, which are websites where people are tortured and killed in real time for the entertainment of the viewer. Around this time, she was beginning to worry her fellow pupils at Colchester High School. She would begin making jokes about killing people and identifying herself as a Satanist, like her idol, Richard Ramirez. She would say to the classmates, if they didn't behave, she would, quote, stab your nan, shag your cat. Scarlett would also often talk about grotesque topics, like dead babies. Her classmates initially found this funny, but it got to the point where this was all she would talk about, and people would soon avoid her because they considered her strange, but also they were scared of her. Scarlett had few friends, and it appears many people at the school actively disliked her. She did have one confidant, a similarly marginalised child called Eddie Ratcliffe. Again, there's been nothing reported that would give an idea of the horror this boy was capable of. He too was born in 2007 and grew up in a 2-parent household in the town of Lee in Greater Manchester. His father was a manager in the company, and his mother was a fitness coach and later a ski instructor. Eddie has 2 siblings, an older brother and a younger sister. He was an accomplished kickboxer and at age 11 competed in a tournament in Jamaica, coming second out of 50 competitors. Eddie was also gifted academically and was clearly highly intelligent from a young age. However, he struggled socially and was extremely isolated as a child. He was later diagnosed as having autistic spectrum disorder, or ASD, but on the lower end of the spectrum. ASD is a lifelong developmental disability which affects how people communicate and interact with the world. People with ASD can vary wildly in their difficulties, and it can include struggling to understand how other people feel, finding it hard to make friends, and struggling with social communication. This condition potentially explains why Eddie was so isolated, but, to be clear, does not in any way, shape or form justify or explain his later crime. Eddie and Scarlett met in around 2018, when they were both 11 years old and attended Coltsworth High School. As I'll get to later, it seems clear they were drawn to each other, as they both gave the other something that was lacking. For Scarlett, Eddie was someone who would follow her around and hang on her every word. For Eddie, Scarlett was his mouthpiece. She helped him to speak to other people, especially girls he liked, but she was also his protector. And, as time progressed, she would say that she would kill anyone who was mean to him. The two became more and more isolated from others. They began to exist in their own little bubble, which quickly became characterized by murder. The pair would spend most of their time watching violent clips they found online, but also mainstream films. Brianna's favourite film was Sweeney Todd starring Johnny Depp. She enjoyed the scenes where he would dispatch his victims by slitting their throats. The pair would scour the darkest corners of the internet for the most depraved material they could find. It's clear that Scarlett was the driving force. It was her sadistic and homicidal urges that dominated the pair's behaviour. By around the year 2000, when they were both 13 years old, they began compiling kill lists. It appears there were multiple of these over the years, and people who annoyed either Scarlett or Eddie, or people they were jealous of for whatever reason, would be added, apparently to be murdered at some later time. It was reported later by parents of one of the pupils at the school that it was well known amongst the children that these kill lists existed, but no alarms were raised, or either Eddie or Scarlett spoken to. The pair exchanged graphic text messages about what they wanted to do to the people on their kill list. They didn't just want to kill them, they wanted to torture and butcher them. They discussed various methods, dispatching their potential victims. Some of them were overt acts of extreme violence, such as cutting their throats or stabbing them, but others were more subtle ways, including poisoning. Regardless of the method of murder, the whole point was to experience a feeling of exhilaration, a feeling of power over other people, either by looking into their eyes if their life ebbed away, or slipping something into their food or drink, and sitting back, seeing their target deteriorate, knowing that they had caused that. Scarlett would talk about wishing to take trophies from her victims, specifically body parts, and eating human flesh. She also claimed to Eddie that she'd already killed 2 people. There's no evidence that this is true. However, it was not all idle threats and boasts, and in September 2022, Scarlett persuaded the 13-year-old people to eat 2 gummy bears. These were in fact cannabis gummy bears, and the child quickly became seriously ill. The police were called. Scarlett was spoken to. It was decided that no further action would be taken, but Scarlett had to move schools, and in October 2022, she moved to Birchwood Community High School, where Brianna attended. Within weeks of starting, the pair would meet, and this would set in motion a sequence of events which would lead to her horrific murder just 4 months later. In October 2022, Scarlett Jenkinson was transferred to Birchwood Community High School and found herself in an inclusion room for children who struggled in larger classes. This seems to be, in part, because Scarlett was believed to have ADHD. She then came into contact with Brianna. It appears their first conversation began when Scarlett said that she liked her eyeliner. From this point, the pair began to hang out and bonded over their shared difficulties, socializing with others. They quickly began to become friends and spent time after school together. Around this time, Scarlett and Eddie were talking about killing 2 boys at the school who had apparently disrespected Scarlett's boyfriend. She wrote that they, quote, deserved death. However, within 6 weeks of first meeting Brianna, Scarlett was apparently having fancies about killing her and suggested adding her to the current kill list, which had the heading, quote, people that need to go. On the 15th of December 2022, Scarlett sent Eddie a message saying, quote, "I'm obsessed over someone I know, but don't have feelings for them. She's called Brianna. I don't know how to explain. Also, she has a dick, laugh out loud." He responded by saying that the reason why she found Brianna interesting was, quote, "because the majority of people aren't trans. It's like going to a funeral and one person wears pink. You're going to be fascinated by their difference." Within days, it appears that they had decided that Brianna was a perfect target. Scarlett said that she was vulnerable and therefore would be easiest to manipulate and eventually attack. Whilst this seems to be the overt reason why Scarlett had initially suggested Brianna as a potential victim, although this issue is likely far more complicated, as I'll get to later, Eddie's interest in ending her life appears to be due to his transphobic attitudes, which he continuously showed in his messages to Scarlett. In these, he would repeatedly refer to Brianna as it and a tranny. He said that he wanted to know whether Brianna would, quote, "scream like a man or a girl," and to see what dick size it had. This was not the extent of his prejudicial attitudes. The pair apparently considered killing another child, who was gay, with Eddie asking that his name be added to the kill list, specifically because of his sexuality. In court, it was stated by Scarlett that Eddie, quote, "didn't agree with people who were transgender or gay." Between late December 2022 and January 2023, Scarlett was sending messages to Eddie about ways of killing Brianna, and he was suggesting poisons she could use. On January the 23rd, 2023, just weeks before Brianna's death, Scarlett sent Eddie a picture of a pile of ibuprofen tablets and asked, quote, "By the way, do you die for eating ibuprofen gel? I've got a plan if you do." Eddie replied, "It is dangerous, yes, but I'm not sure how much would be lethal." Scarlett went on, "You know that girl I mentioned, Brianna? I'm still trying to kill her, and the easiest way is pill overdose. People already know she's depressed and shit, so nobody would get sus. But, for some reason, she has a high tolerance. I gave her some today, and that should have been enough to kill her." Scarlett then complained that Brianna had only vomited and didn't die. Horrifyingly, this appears to be true. It seems as though on at least a couple of occasions, Scarlett and Brianna took drugs together, including cocaine, but also pills. Around this time, Scarlett potentially gave Brianna what she said were pills to get her high, but these were actually ibuprofen. Esther Jai, Brianna's mother, stated that at pretty much the same time these messages were sent, Brianna was very unwell and was vomiting and was in a lot of pain. She threw out what Esther thought were grape skins, but upon reflection, they were likely the remnants of red ibuprofen gel tablets. Over the next few days, Brianna was off school, and Scarlett sent a message to Eddie saying that she hoped, quote, "those tablets I gave her might slowly be killing her." Eddie suggested increasing the dosage next time. However, the pair quickly decided that they were going to kill Brianna by stabbing her, and this seemed to be because Eddie wanted to try out his new hunting knife that he bought at the beginning of January 2023 on a family ski trip. It's important to highlight two things at this point. Firstly, part of the reason why Eddie wanted to be involved in killing Brianna was not just because of his prejudicial attitudes, but also because, in exchange, Scarlett had promised to talk to a girl that he liked before Valentine's Day. Secondly, while Scarlett was apparently friends with Brianna, she had never met Eddie before. The first time she laid eyes on him was the day of her death. Both facts are mentioned again when talking about the profile of the pair. Whilst Brianna Jai was eventually murdered on the 11th of February 2023, the pair had originally planned to kill her on Saturday, January the 28th. They had intended to murder another child, referred to as Boy E in court proceedings, but were unable to gain access to him, and so focused on Brianna. The plan was to lure her into cold chifling a park, stab her, and then cover her body with logs. On Friday, January the 27th, 2023, Scarlett contacted Brianna and asked if the pair could meet the next day, apparently to take drugs. Brianna agreed, and Scarlett and Eddie were giddy with excitement, and there were a flurry of text messages between the pair. These are all direct quotes. Eddie said, "I want to see if it will scream, like a man or a girl." Scarlett told him, "We need to think of a plan." Eddie responds, "But the body plan is first. If we know what we're doing with the body, we'll know what we can and can't do." She replied, "Let's stab her. Original Boy E plan, back and throat." Eddie asks, "So I bring my knife?" She says, "Yes, Is it definitely sharp enough, by the way? Scarlett later said to Eddie regarding the plan for the next day, "Me and the other wooden posts and linear at 12. We'll go over the plan again, and I'll show you where I'm killing her. And then we both walk to the library to meet her and grab onto Brianna, slit her throat. When she starts to fall, stab her in the back, then pass me the knife. I want to stab her at least once, even if she's dead, just 'cause it's fun, laugh out loud." Eddie said, "Let's have 2 words, one for getting the knife ready and another to stab." "The morning of the planned murder," Scarlett replied, "for get knife ready, I'll look at you and cough, and to stab, I'll say gay." Scarlett and Eddie plans to meet Brianna in Colchester on Saturday, January the 28th at 1 p.m. and travelled into the village. But at 11:25 a.m, Brianna sent a message to Scarlett saying she couldn't come. The pair met anyway and went to Linear Park in what the police called a dry run. Scarlett and Eddie again planned to kill Brianna 2 days later, on Monday the 30th of January. Scarlett suggested trying to kill Brianna with an overdose of cocaine, but then decided, quote, "Let's just stab her, it's more fun." The plan was aborted when Eddie said he didn't want to bring a knife into school. Finally, they decided to try a third time on Saturday the 11th of February 2023. On the 3rd of February, Scarlett sent Eddie a picture of the plan she'd written, which was entitled, quote, "Saturday the 11th of February 2023. Victim, Brianna Jai." It went on to say, "Meet Eddie at Wooden Post 1 p.m. Walk down to library, bus stop. Wait until Brianna gets off bus. Then the 3 of us walk to Linear Park. Go to the pipe/tunnel area. I say code word to Eddie. He stabs her in the back as I stab her in the stomach. Eddie drags the body into the area. We both cover up the area with logs, etc." On Friday the 10th of February 2023, Scarlett contacted Brianna and asked her to meet the next day. They're promising the pair would take cocaine. This was agreed, and they arranged to meet outside Colchester Library the next day in the afternoon. As well as the plan for the murder itself, the pair also came up with an almost farcical way to get away with the murder. Scarlett had set up a fake social media profile of a man called Nathan, a drug dealer from Manchester. She was going to send messages to this profile just prior to the murder, making it seem as though he was coming to meet them to provide drugs. Then, they would murder Brianna and claim that she had gone off with Nathan. He must have been the one who killed her. There were some final messages between Scarlett and Eddie, with them clarifying the last details of their plan. Scarlett asked, quote, "What knife are you bringing?" He responded, "I showed you in person, as well as on the phone." Scarlett said, "Yeah, I remember, and that will definitely 100% kill her?" Eddie replies, "Yes, it cuts my skin easily." She concluded by saying that she was excited as fuck for tomorrow. CCTV footage was integral to proving the guilt of both Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson, and enables a detailed timeline of Brianna's final hours alive to be presented. These images are truly harrowing, for they show a young woman travelling to her death, to meet a pair of evil children who have meticulously planned her murder, including one who had likely already, just weeks before, tried to kill her. At 12:45 p.m, on Saturday the 11th of February 2023, the doorbell camera at her home in Birchwood captured Brianna leaving for the final time. At 1:38 p.m, she boarded the number 28 bus from Birchwood train station to Colchester Village Library, a pre-arranged meeting point. At 1:41 p.m, whilst on the bus, Brianna texted her mum Esther, quote, "I'm on bus by myself. I'm scared." Esther texts back, "That's well good." Esther later said that she was proud of her daughter for making the effort to overcome her anxiety. At 1:53 p.m, CCTV from the bus shows Brianna getting off and walking towards Scarlett, marked with the label X. Eddie is labelled with Y, and even now his behaviour seems suspicious. He's skulking about to one side, but eventually joins the pair. As a reminder, he had never met Brianna before. He was armed with the murder weapon, the hunting knife with a 5-inch blade that he'd bought the month before. Both Scarlett and Eddie had been in the area for at least an hour, more likely closer to 2. They'd been to the spot they'd chosen to kill Brianna, in Linear Park, and essentially had a practice run of the route they would take her and the murder itself. The trio then walked through the village of Colchester towards Linear Park, where they were apparently going to take cocaine. This walk took them around 15 minutes. They were seen by several locals during this time, who reported they were laughing and chatting with each other and seemed like normal teenagers spending the afternoon together. They entered Linear Park at around 2:10 p.m. and walked down this path and then up these steps to a park bench. They were seen by several witnesses who said that all three were not really talking anymore and they were all on their phones. They spent about an hour hanging around the location where Brianna would be murdered. DNA found on a bottle of Dr. Pepper suggested that she sat down and had a drink whilst apparently waiting for the drugs to be delivered. At that moment, Scarlett was on her phone, putting the pair's extremely weak attempt to get away with this crime into action. She was sending messages backwards and forwards to the Snapchat profile she'd set up for the mythical drug dealer from Manchester, Nathan. Between 2:15 p.m. and just before the murder, just under an hour later, she sent messages backwards and forwards to herself, pretending to be directing Nathan to their location. These messages include her saying, quote, "We're here now, come and meet us." And the response from Nathan was, "Sorry mate, almost there, 5 mins, 10 mins tops." At 3:01 p.m, Scarlett sent one final message to Nathan, telling him to hurry to their location. At 3:06 p.m, Brianna sent her final message, which was to Scarlett, saying, quote, "Girl, where are you?" This was likely a minute before the attack. And at the same time, Eddie was seen skulking around the steps leading up to the park bench, looking furtive. What was happening here, and I'm certain of this, is that with the breadcrumbs they were expecting the police to follow laid, meaning they would determine that the fictional Nathan had come to the park and killed Brianna, both Eddie and Scarlett walked away to check for witnesses, with him going down the steps and Scarlett walking down an adjoining path. The pair must have then turned, and like jackals approached Brianna, who was sitting on the bench. The attack then began. What happened next will never be known for absolute certainty, as both blamed the other when they were caught, or changed their stories. But it seems that Eddie pulled out the hunting knife and stabbed Brianna approximately 3 times. He then stopped, and Scarlett took the knife and inflicted a further 25 horrific stab wounds. Brianna was stabbed in the head, neck, chest and back. She had defensive injuries on her hands, meaning that she'd fought back, but also this indicates that she likely knew she was about to die. She must have been absolutely terrified. Brianna was stabbed 28 times. They didn't want to just murder her, they wanted to obliterate her. The attack was frenzied and vicious, and went on for between 3 to 4 minutes. At around 3:10 p.m, a couple, Catherine and Andrew Vise, were walking their dog when they rounded a corner so they could see the park bench and the area of the attack. They saw 2 teenagers, one male and one female, bending down over something they thought was an injured animal. Catherine and Andrew then saw the teenagers run away and approached. To their horror, they found the object they'd seen was not an animal, but the mutilated body of a girl who was lying face down in the mud. At 3:13 p.m, Catherine called 999. Her call was played in court, and whilst this hasn't been released, a transcript has, and it's truly horrifying. I'm going to read quotes from this call. Catherine begins by saying, "I'm in Colchester Linear Park. Somebody has been attacked. We've seen some of the attackers run away from the body. She's very hurt. She's halfway down some stairs. She's bleeding heavily. She's got blood on her legs and on her back. She's really hurt." The operator then confirms the location they're calling from. Catherine continues saying, "We thought it was a dummy at first. I don't want to touch her either. I don't know if she's alive. She did twitch before. It's an absolute mess." The operator tells Catherine to take some breaths and asks, "Do you think she's been hit?" Catherine says, "I think she's been attacked. She may have been stabbed. There's blood coming out of her back." She then describes the 2 teenagers she saw running away as a boy and a girl, both wearing hoodies. The operator asks if Brianna is breathing, and Catherine says, "No, I don't think so. I can't see her face. It's covered in blood. I don't know. It's awful. She looks dead to me. Are they coming quickly? It's a nightmare." Catherine told the operator that Brianna's shirt was soaked with blood on her back. Finally, Catherine told the operator, "I don't think there's anything you can do for her. Oh God." Andrew, Catherine's husband, had sprinted to be able to direct the police and paramedics to the spot where Brianna had been found. They attended at around 3:16 p.m. and found that despite her horrific injuries, Brianna was still barely alive. However, almost immediately, she went into cardiac arrest, and despite valiant efforts to save her life, Brianna Jai was declared dead at the scene at 4:02 p.m. She was just 16 years old. The police immediately started the murder investigation. Around the same time that paramedics were fighting to save Brianna's life, her killers were filmed walking away from the park, and Eddie was captured on CCTV, getting on a bus to go home. There are so many elements to this case which are sickening, and which speak to the evil of both Addie Radcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson. Some of these details are small, such as Scarlett telling Brianna to only get a single ticket on the bus to meet them, her sick way of making a joke about the fact that she would never be returning home. Also, Scarlett took a picture of Brianna in the park just before killing her, a sick memento of her accomplishment. However, to me, the thing that stands out is the fact that both Scarlett and Eddie spent over an hour with Brianna before they murdered her. They walked, talked and laughed with her. Her being in their presence, seeing her right in front of them, a human being, someone with thoughts, feelings, hopes and dreams, didn't deter them at all. In fact, I think that them walking with Brianna, knowing they were walking her to her death, was exciting. They were getting off on the thought of what they were about to do and the power they had, by knowing that she had no idea she had just an hour left to live. Their level of evil and their own arrogance continued after the crime. It's clear they both thought they were extremely clever. Despite all of their electronic communications being easily retrievable, they've been caught on CCTV every step of the way, and even them being seen fleeing the scene of the murder, they continue to act as though they were untouchable. Scarlett and Eddie remained in touch, sending each other updates on the progress of the investigation and news articles about the murder. It seems like for a short time, they began to try and act surprised, no doubt in case their foes were searched by the police, clearly ignoring the fact that, if these messages were read, the hundreds of incriminating texts they'd been sending over the previous few weeks would also be checked. An example of this feigned ignorance was shown by Scarlett sending a message to Eddie at 5:25 p.m, so just hours after the attack, saying, quote, "My brother just told me not to go to Linear Park because a woman got stabbed." Eddie replies, "Jesus, really?" She then sent him a news article about the murder, and Eddie said, "Holy crap." However, they quickly dropped this when Eddie began worrying that they would be identified as the killers. At around 7:45 p.m, Scarlett sent Eddie a message saying, quote, "You're not going to get caught, don't worry. Police are shite here." The pair's evil was matched only by their stupidity, and their freedom would be short-lived as the police quickly closed in on them. Cheshire Police descended on the scene. They quickly worked out that the killers were likely the two teenagers seen running away. An appeal for witnesses quickly resulted in phone calls to the police from people who identified Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Radcliffe as being with Brianna on the day of her murder. Word got back to Scarlett's mother, and she confronted her daughter, asking whether she'd been with Brianna. She confirmed that she had. To her credit, at 4:59 p.m. on the 12th of February 2023, Scarlett's mother called 101 and reported this information to the police. By this point, Scarlett was panicking, and at 5:52 p.m, she sent a message to Eddie saying, quote, "I haven't got a station, but my mum phoned police. Make sure story adds up. Say to police everything. We met Brianna at 1:30, walked to Linear, and sat and chilled on the bench. Then Brianna looked at her phone and said she was gonna meet some lad and walked off. In a last futile effort to make herself look innocent and shift the blame, Scarlett posted a disgusting message on a memorial page set up for Brianna, writing, quote, "Brianna was one of the best people I've ever met, and such an amazing friend. It was so fucking sickening what happened to her." She also continues to try to push the claim that Brianna had been murdered by a man called Nathan, with Scarlett also sending a message to Brianna's mobile, which read, quote, "Girl, is everything okay? Some teenage girl got killed in Linear Park. It's on news everywhere. And why did you ditch us for some random man from Manchester? Like, what the fuck? This is so fucked up." This was futile. The police did enough to arrest both Scarlett and Eddie on suspicion of murder, and at 7:32 p.m, just over 24 hours after the murder, Scarlett was arrested in her home, as shown by this video.
Listen to what I've got to say.
Yeah.
At this moment, because the information I have received, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. Obviously you are under caution, so anything you say is getting recorded. Okay?
If me being suspect is because, like, I was the last person seen her, or, like, how come I'm suspect?
Pardon?
Like, how come I'm a suspect?
How come you're a suspect?
Because I'm the last person seen her, is it?
I don't know. All the information I've received is you are a suspect, okay, to the murder.
Yeah.
You Eddie?
Yeah.
Eddie, you're locked up suspicion of murder, alright? You don't have to say anything, but you may harm you if you don't mention when questioned. So you later lie in court and if you do say the evidence. Do you understand?
I can explain it.
No, listen.
Right, listen.
Do it all on an interview, alright? You're going to take it to the wrong corner, you'll be interviewed about it, they'll ask you questions, alright?
The police seized everything, including the pair's mobile phones, to be sent for analysis, but they quickly came across critical evidence. In Eddie's room, they found the murder weapon, which would later be shown to have Brianna's DNA on the blade. And in Scarlett's room, they found her notebook, and a quick flip through the pages took the police to the handwritten plan to murder Brianna Jai. Both Scarlett and Eddie were interviewed. The audio of their interviews has not been released, just video footage, but the contrast in their presentation is clear. Later, experts in body language said that Scarlett's presentation is indicative of her arrogance. She appears completely unable to grasp that the police could easily see through her lies. She seems curious about what the police know. It's clear that she thought their arresting her was a mistake. They would soon be asking her about what she knew about Nathan, the real killer. They didn't ask about any third party. They asked her about the evidence they'd already obtained, including the note about killing Brianna, found in her home. Scarlett denied everything. She stated that Brianna had gone off with a boy from Manchester. She was completely innocent. When asked questions she couldn't answer, she simply replied no comment. The interviews with Eddie were completely different. He was looking away, clearly nervous, and during one, was hugging a football. He denied that he'd killed Brianna, and instead said that he'd seen Scarlett doing this. He said, quote, "I turned away to go to the toilet behind a tree. When I turned back round, I saw Scarlett stabbing Brianna. Brianna was on the floor. Eddie said that Scarlett had been talking about murder for ages and mentioned about being a Satanist. When asked by detectives why he'd brought a hunting knife to the park, he denied that he had. He said, quote, "I never tried to murder anyone. It goes against everything I already know and believe. Everything. It stopped anything I want to do in the future. I just never tried to do anything like what's happened." After consulting with his solicitor, Eddie then gave no comment responses. He was trying to save his own skin by throwing Scarlett under the bus. However, he confirmed that they were the teenagers seen running from the scene and therefore were likely the ones responsible for Brianna's murder. And despite his claim that he'd not brought the murder weapon to the scene, this was found hidden in his room with Brianna's blood on the blade. On the 15th of February 2023, the Crown Prosecution Service found there was enough evidence to charge both Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe with the murder of Brianna Jai. They both appeared in court the next day and were remanded until their appearances in Crown Court. Scarlett was sent to Edelbeck Secure Children's Home in Leeds and Eddie to Barton Moss in Salford. Due to their ages, restrictions were placed on their names being published, but it was reported that Girl X and Boy Y were just 15 years old. It was only prior to the sentencing in February 2024 that their names were published. However, the details of the ages of the people likely responsible for the murder of Brianna left the country appalled, and it had terrible echoes of other horrific acts of violence perpetrated by children. By the time the pair appeared in Manchester Crown Court, Scarlett Jenkinson had changed her story. She dropped the facade of a mythical third party being involved. Instead, she'd been with Brianna, had walked away for a moment. While her back was turned, Eddie Ratcliffe had stabbed her. She had nothing to do with it. Eddie had not changed his account. It was all Scarlett. Both gave evidence during the trial. With regards to Scarlett, she openly admitted that she had fantasies about killing people, including Brianna and every other person on her list of potential targets. She also stated that she openly expressed these thoughts to Eddie. She even admitted that she'd even written a plan of how to kill Brianna. But it was all just fantasy. She had no intention of doing any of it. She wriggled and squirmed whilst giving evidence, clearly trying to pin all of the blame on Eddie. With regards to the actual incident, Scarlett's admitted that she'd lured Brianna to the park under false pretenses, but said this was simply to get her to hang out. She was asked why this was necessary. If they were friends, surely she could have just asked to spend time with her. Scarlett had no real answer to this. She denied that she had any intention of murdering Brianna. It was all Eddie. He must have taken what she had told him and acted on it. She gave quite a performance, crying and shaking while stating she had seen Eddie stab Brianna around 5 times. She was unable to account for the other 20 stab wounds. She said she was in shock and scared, and, on impulse, ran when Eddie ran away. It was pointed out that despite being shocked and scared, she was seen walking away with Eddie after this incident, rather than running off in any other direction. How did she get blood on her clothing? This was when she went over to check if Brianna was still breathing. Why didn't she tell her parents or the police? She was covering up for Eddie. Since being remanded, Eddie had apparently developed selective mutism. This is a condition where a person is unable to speak in certain situations, which they associate with a high level of anxiety. His defense tried to argue that this was as a result of the trauma of seeing Scarlett butchering Brianna. However, as I'll return to later, if he did indeed suffer from this condition, it had nothing to do with trauma related to the murder itself. It was the anxiety about the fact he'd been caught and was likely going to go to prison for decades. In order to accommodate this issue, Eddie was allowed to give evidence by typing on a computer in response to questions. This would then flash up on a screen, which would be read out by an assigned adult. He was given puzzle books to look through and fidget toys to play with, apparently to lessen his anxiety. I feel this part was a deliberate strategy by his defence. Get him to play with toys and read puzzle books, all to reinforce to the jury that this is a child. Look how vulnerable he looks. Do you really think he's a killer? Look at Scarlett. Look how evil she looks. Eddie's account of the murder was a mirror image of that given by Scarlett. He had his back turned and heard a noise, and when he looked back, saw Scarlett stabbing Brianna. She was the driving force behind everything. She spoke about her fancies about killing. She was the one who suggested killing Brianna, who came up with the plan, who lured her to her death. He had no interest in killing anyone. He didn't dislike Brianna because she was transgender. He didn't even know her. Why did he have blood on his clothes? Because he'd gone over to check if Brianna was breathing after Scarlett had stabbed her. On the 20th of December 2023, the jury retired to consider their verdicts. After just 5 hours of deliberation, they returned and found Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe guilty of the murder of Brianna Jai. The case was adjourned for completion of psychiatric reports, and on the 2nd of February 2024, the pair were back for sentencing before Mrs. Justice Yip. It was clear that Scarlett had dropped her facade and was trying to get recognition for what she'd done. To one of the psychiatrists, Dr. Witt's Church, Scarlett confessed that she stabbed Brianna after Eddie had stabbed her a few times. She stated that she'd done this because it was, quote, exciting. She also made the somewhat strange claim that she was worried that Brianna would leave her, and so killed her to keep her friend with her forever. Scarlett also said that she was disturbed at the scene of the murder before she could take a trophy, specifically one of Brianna's eyes. She explicitly stated that she wanted to kill again. However, after making this disclosure, Scarlett went back to stating that she was blameless and Eddie was the killer. Dr. Church felt this was a performance, that Scarlett was running through a list of the most heinous things she could say in order to shock others, to be seen as the big bad killer. He said that Scarlett had, quote, limited pro-social emotions, so read that as a lack of empathy, remorse or guilt. Another psychiatrist reported that Scarlett had antisocial personality disorder, and whilst it's not explicitly stated, given her actions, this was clearly severe enough that she would be classed as a psychopath. It also came out of the sentencing hearing that Scarlett had compiled another kill list, this time including staff at the secure unit she was being held at. With regards to Eddie Ratcliffe, it appears this level of assessment was not as intensive. He was described as being, quote, extremely vulnerable, and the reports on him stated that, as I've already outlined, he had autistic spectrum disorder, but was at the lower end of this scale. It also cited his poor social skills. However, as the judge stated later, and I fully agree, none of his underlying issues were linked to his decision to murder Brianna. The sentencing hearing for both children, now aged 16, was televised. By this point, they'd been named nationally, and their pictures appeared in every newspaper in the country. I'll play approximately half of the sentencing hearing. I'll leave a link to the full thing in the description.
Here it is agreed that the question is whether the murder was, at least in part, motivated by hostility to Brianna because she was transgender. My conclusions on these issues are important, but they are not decisive because in the end I am required to decide whether the offence is one of particularly high seriousness and then to put everything else into the balance to reach the end point, which is what you will be most interested in. Scarlett, I have concluded that the primary motivation for Brianna's murder was your deep desire to kill. The messages reveal your fantasies and show your sadistic motives. Brianna's murder was exceptionally brutal. Your actions after the event and what you have told Dr. Church confirm you enjoyed the killing. Taking all that evidence together, this was a murder involving sadistic conduct. Eddie, although your motives may not have been the same, you knew what Scarlett wanted to do and why. You understood her desire to see Brianna suffer. You actively participated in this brutal murder, knowing the sadistic motives behind it, and you cannot avoid the consequences just by saying you did not have the same desires. I find also that you, Eddie, were motivated in part by hostility towards Brianna because she was transgender. You dehumanised Brianna by constantly referring to her as it, and your messages about wanting to see if she would scream like a man or a girl and really wanting to see what size dick it had, along with checking the night before the killing that Brianna was coming, show your own interests in killing Brianna linked to your hostility towards her as a transgender person. Just as you knew of Scarlett's motives, she knew of yours, although I cannot go so far as to say she used your transphobic attitudes to get you involved. I therefore find that you both took part in a brutal and planned murder which was sadistic in nature and where a secondary motive was hostility towards Brianna because of her transgender identity. In any event, however it is analysed, I think it is plain that this was a murder of particularly high seriousness and that the part each of you played leads to the starting point of 20 years. Had I not reached that conclusion, I would have treated the sadistic motives and transphobic comments as significant aggravating features at the next stage. As it is, I will be careful not to double count things that have already gone into the starting point. There are many serious features in this case, but they overlap, and it would be wrong to treat each one as separately uplifting the minimum term. I also keep firmly in mind that you are very young, and you must be sentenced with the hope, if not the immediate expectation, that you can one day be rehabilitated, however cruel that may seem to those who have lost a loved one. Looking at aggravating factors, Brianna's murder involved a significant degree of planning and premeditation, with more general plans to kill other people. The planning started with you, Scarlett, and it was you who brought Eddie in. But Eddie, you joined in with the planning. I do bear in mind that apart from the awful subject matter, the plans were in some ways quite childish. Scarlett's notebooks were left where they could easily be found. But the extent of the planning, on any view, remains a significant aggravating factor for each of you. In your case, Scarlett, I have to bear in mind that you tried to kill Brianna by poisoning her. Although that does not apply to you, Eddie, you did encourage further attempts at poisoning, although that did not happen. Both of you were involved in the failed attempt to kill Brianna on the 28th of January and persisted when that did not come off. Brianna was vulnerable, as described by her family, even if not strictly to be treated as vulnerability in the statutory sense. You picked Brianna because you both thought she would be an easy target. In doing so, you, Scarlett, abused her trust. She thought you were her friend. You encouraged her not to be anxious and guided her through getting the bus. Eddie, you knew Scarlett was preying on Brianna in this way, and so it aggravates your offending too, although perhaps to a lesser degree than Scarlett's. I recognise these features are part of the planning I have described, and I avoid double counting, but they are still matters to put in the balance. I have taken account of the brutality of the killing and the use of the knife when assessing the starting point. I have also built in the sadistic motive and transphobic hostility. All these things are very serious features, but I have explained how they are linked, and so they do not each call for separate additional uplifts. They do, though, have to be recognised in balancing the aggravating and mitigating features. Taken together, they illustrate how serious this offence was, even in the context of other murders falling into the category I have identified. The attempts to conceal evidence were not sophisticated and do not have any significant impact. Brianna's body was not concealed, probably because you were disturbed. I will not speculate as to what might have happened if you had not been. It is an aggravating feature that you committed the murder in broad daylight, in a park when there were other people around, including a family playing hide and seek and lots of dog walkers. It was always likely that other people would come upon the scene and suffer trauma, as happened. In considering mitigation, I have considered everything I have read about you, including the pre-sentence reports. I bear in mind your previous good character, although this must be viewed in the context of very serious offending and the contents of the messages. Within the 15 to 16 age range, there will be differing levels of maturity. I must look at your maturity while also thinking about any mental or developmental disorders which may have lowered your culpability, looking at the various reports on you both. Scarlett, the assessment of your intellectual ability fits with other evidence that you are not mature or clever. You have some vulnerabilities. Since you were about 14, you have had problems with your mood, anxiety, self-harming and anorexia. Reports prepared before the trial suggested you had traits of autism and ADHD. Dr. Church no longer thinks that applies. You have changed your account since the trial. You have admitted taking part in Brianna's murder. You have said things about what you did and how you felt, both to Dr. Church and to others, including Miss Howarth, who wrote the pre-sentence report. You have lied so many times, Scarlett, that it is impossible to know what is true and what is not. There are, though, worrying things in the recent reports. You have expressed the desire to kill again. If those thoughts continue, you will not be released. Dr. Church's latest report will need to be retained on your file. It contains important information the parole board would need to consider. You have shown no remorse. Having now assessed you several times, Dr. Church has diagnosed that you have a severe form of conduct dissocial disorder, one of the features of which is having no empathy. Your lack of empathy does provide some explanation for how you could commit such a dreadful murder, but in my view, it does not significantly lower your culpability. There is no suggestion that you did not know that what you were doing was wrong or that you were unable to control your actions. You were able to plan in an organised way and had full awareness that it was criminal behaviour. In short, your diagnosed disorder did not drive your actions, although it meant you did not have the mental break that most people have to stop them wanting to harm others because that feels wrong. It may not have felt wrong, but there is no doubt you knew it was wrong, to act as you did, and you chose to do so anyway. I take account of the diagnosis, but in my view, it offers limited mitigation. There are no other relevant diagnoses in your case, but there are some concerns about your mental health and how you will respond after today, which those responsible for your care will no doubt note. Scarlett, it is clear that if you are ever to be released, a huge amount of work will need to be done with you first. But the hope remains that this can happen, and you should work hard on your rehabilitation. Eddie, you have been described as extremely vulnerable. There are areas in which your functioning is like that of a much younger child. Your social skills are certainly not as developed as most people of your age. I have looked carefully at the limitations outlined by Dr. Diggle, but it is hard to view these limitations as significantly lowering your culpability for Brianna's murder. I should also say that my analysis of your offending differs in some important respects from that contained in the pre-sentence report. Ms. Howarth has attempted to make sense of what you have told her, but you have not given a truthful account. I have found her report helpful though, reading it in the context of my factual findings. I bear in mind that it is difficult for a proper assessment to be made as to the impact of your ASD while you continue to deny what you did. But I am confident from all I have seen that you knew very well that what you were doing was terribly wrong, and that you were capable of saying no to Scarlett. Your autism cannot provide any real excuse for the offence. I do though recognise that some downwards adjustment is required in balancing against the aggravating factors to reflect that you are less mature than many others within the 15 to 16 age category, and that your thinking skills are less developed in several areas. More generally, your ASD, severe anxiety and selective mutism has made your experience of custody more difficult. Despite this, Dr. Crawford's latest report shows reasonable progress. You have managed to pass your GCSEs while in custody and to begin studying A-levels, and you have agreed to start speech and language therapy. Although you showed no remorse at trial, or indeed today, the pre-sentence report showed some insight into Brianna's family's feelings. You told Miss Howarth, "I wouldn't think that there is anything to say because I'm certain that there is nothing either of us could say that would ever help them with their situation and would more than likely cause more pain." This is, in fact, quite a mature statement and one that may be built upon. I also find that it is consistent with my view that despite the limitations identified in the expert evidence, you are capable of thinking about the consequences of your actions. Taking the evidence as a whole, I find that the impact of your ASD on your culpability is limited. I do not doubt that transferring to prison when you are an adult will be difficult. Prison is more difficult for those who are neurodiverse. Your behaviour in custody has been good so far, and it is clear from the pre-sentence report that there is a hope that you may one day be rehabilitated. You must continue to work towards that. I have weighed all the aggravating and mitigating factors that apply to each of you. Although I have taken the same starting point, I have concluded that the final minimum terms must be different. In Scarlett's case, the aggravating features are significant and would have led to a substantial uplift to the starting point, but for the mitigation, particularly that relating to maturity and mental disorder. There must still be an uplift, but it will be moderated. In Eddie's case, I find that the balance to be struck between aggravating factors, which are not quite as high as in Scarlett's case, and the mitigation I have identified is such as to cancel each other out. In saying that, I have taken account of all the medical evidence and accept the diagnosis of ASD has some impact, but the extent to which it reduced your culpability in the circumstances of this offending is limited. This was undoubtedly a very serious offence with multiple aggravating factors. That is the context in which I impose minimum terms which are lengthy for offenders of your age, albeit significantly less than an equivalent sentence for an adult. The parole board will have to decide if and when either or both of you can be released. That will only happen if you no longer pose a danger. If you are released, you will remain on licence for life and you may be recalled to prison. I will now sentence each of you. You may remain seated. In both cases, the relevant statutory surcharge will apply. Scarlett Jenkinson, for the murder of Brianna Jai, you will be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. I set the minimum term at 22 years, less the 352 days that you have spent on remand. Eddie Radcliffe, for the murder of Brianna Jai, you will be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. I set the minimum term at 20 years, less the 352 days that you have spent on remand. Please take the defendants to the cells and their legal teams will come and see them before they go to begin their sentences. Thank you.
Which I imagine will be a massive shock to the system. The funeral of Brianna Jai took place on the 15th of March 2023, with her pink casket being drawn by white horses to St Elphin's Church in Warrington, where hundreds of people, both those who knew Brianna and those who were touched by her horrific death, had gathered. The church was packed, and many people stood in the rain outside to listen to the service and pay their respects. There was a sea of pink, Brianna's favourite colour. There were pink ties, pink shirts, pink tops, pink hair and pink balloons. Some people wore pink t-shirts with Brianna's face on them, with words "Rest in Power" written beneath.
Not be released. Dr. Church's latest report will need to be retained on your file. It contains important information the parole board would need to consider. You have shown no remorse. Having now assessed you several times, Dr. Church has diagnosed that you have a severe form of conduct dissocial disorder, one of the features of which is having no empathy. Your lack of empathy does provide some explanation for how you could commit such a dreadful murder, but in my view, it does not significantly lower your culpability. There is no suggestion that you did not know that what you were doing was wrong or that you were unable to control your actions. You were able to plan in an organised way and had full awareness that it was criminal behaviour. In short, your diagnosed disorder did not drive your actions, although it meant you did not have the mental break that most people have to stop them wanting to harm others because that feels wrong. It may not have felt wrong, but there is no doubt you knew it was wrong to act as you did, and you chose to do so anyway. I take account of the diagnosis, but in my view, it offers limited mitigation. There are no other relevant diagnoses in your case.
We are forever grateful to all of Brianna's family and friends, our community, and everyone else that's been affected by this horror. We are truly sorry. I want to play a clip of Esther remembering her daughter.
Brianna was larger than life. She was funny, witty and fearless. We miss Brianna so much, and our house feels empty without her laughter. To know how scared my usually fearless child must have been when she was alone in that park with someone that she called her friend will haunt me forever. Prior to the trial, I had moments where I felt sorry for the defendants because they had ruined their own lives as well as ours. But now, knowing the true nature and seeing neither display an ounce of remorse for what they have done to Brianna, I have lost all sympathy that I may have previously had for them, and I am glad that they will spend many years in prison and away from society. I would like to take this opportunity to give my thanks to all involved in the outcome today. Thank you to Cheshire Police and CPS for all of the hard work that has gone into building this case following a thorough investigation led by DCI Adam Waller and DI Nigel Parr. Thank you to our liaison officers, DC Sarah Newton and DC Linda Turtle, for supporting us throughout the investigation and trial with such professionalism and kindness. Thank you to Justice Yip for ensuring a fair trial has been carried out for all. Thank you to the prosecution, Deanna Hare, Casey and her team for all of the hard work throughout and for advocating for Brianna in such an outstanding way. Thank you also to the jury for making the right decision based on the evidence. I understand how difficult this must have been for you all, but you have worked hard, and thanks to you, society is now a safer place. Thank you to all of those who gave evidence, with special thanks to the couple who found Brianna and PC Chadwick, the first officer on the scene. I'm so grateful that in the last moments of her life, she had the concern and kindness from you all, and I undoubtedly know that you did all you could do to help my precious child. Thank you to the majority of the press who have reported sensitively throughout. This has meant a lot to our family and Brianna's friends. Lastly, please have some empathy and compassion for the families of the young people convicted of this horrific crime. They too have lost a child, and they must live the rest of their lives knowing what their child has done. My family and I request some healing space for the next few weeks. However, I will be back at the end of January to continue my campaigning for better mental health support for young people and their families. Thank you.
Brianna Michelle Taylor Jai was born on November the 7th, 2006 and left this world on the 11th of February 2023 at the age of just 16 years old. She struggled with her mental health, but had the courage to stand up for who she was, to try to help others, and she sought to bring light to the world. She was clearly her mother's daughter. Rest easy, Brianna. You'll never be forgotten. I'm sure that most of the people watching this in the UK and maybe overseas are aware of this case, but likely not the full details. I wasn't until I began researching this video. I didn't realise how horrific Scarlett Jenkinson and Eddie Ratcliffe really were, including their vile messages to each other and their persistence in trying to kill Brianna. In order to understand Scarlett and Eddie, I need to separate this section into two. Firstly, I need to cover the pair themselves, their motivations, their backgrounds, their psychology, but then secondly, why they specifically chose Brianna as their victim. So, with regards to the pair, they remind me of John Venables and Robert Thompson, a similarly depraved partnership of evil, who each brought disturbing traits to the table, which resulted in the creation of something that was greater than its parts. With regards to Scarlett and Eddie, she was the dominant one of the group, a child who had developed a disturbing fascination with serial killers and violence, which she had access through the internet. She later disclosed to a psychiatrist that she liked killing because it gave her a feeling of power. This is important, as it's clear this is what drew her into this world. She saw the power that violence gave a person. With regards to serial killers, she saw how one person could take human life again and again and again, but also in some cases, hold an entire city or country in a state of terror, all because of them.
There was definitely some deep-rooted feelings of inadequacy with Scarlett, and she saw violence and killing others as a way to fill this void. Almost no one in the school liked her. This seems to have been because of how she behaved. She was desperate for someone to hang out with, but not as a friend, someone she considered weaker than her, who she could control, and then she came across Eddie Ratcliffe. Eddie Ratcliffe also clearly felt inadequate. He was socially awkward and seemed particularly upset that he couldn't talk to girls he fancied. He came across Scarlett, a girl who was on the fringes of society like he was, and they likely began bonding based on this. Them against the world. Scarlett gave Eddie confidence, and also a mouthpiece in the world. If he wanted to speak to a girl, that Scarlett would do it for him, or at least tell him what to say. I've no doubt that Eddie is also psychopathic. I think this is an important thing to point out at this stage. Scarlett wrote in her notebook that one of the reasons she liked Eddie was because he was essentially emotionless. His presentation may have been due, in part, to him being on the autistic spectrum, but this doesn't explain his complete lack of empathy or remorse. To give an example of how remorseless he was, as I said earlier, during court, he had to give his answers to questions by typing them on a screen because of his selective mutism. This could have been a performance, but I think it may well have been genuine, as he did have a history of extreme anxiety. However, what's important is that while his defense claimed it was because he was traumatized due to being there when Brianna was killed, I think nothing could be further from the truth. The reason he was anxious was because he is a coward and was facing the consequences of his actions. Being in court, a place his fate would be decided, triggered him. However, it's been reported that when he returned to the secure unit each day, he would be fine, and, on one occasion after a day in court, he was eager to get back, to put in his Christmas jumper, to be involved in the festivities that had been organised. He didn't care that Brianna was dead. The only thing he cared about was being in trouble. Whilst Eddie may have had an interest in violence, this was clearly not as pronounced as Scarlett's. Over the years, she taught him, by showing him videos online, going on and on about serial killers, that murder was a way that he could feel powerful. Eddie lapped this up. He had someone who was paying him attention and was telling him how he could go from this socially awkward child to being akin to a god, utterly powerful and utterly feared. As time went on, the pair fed off each other. Scarlett needed to keep impressing her little minion and made outrageous claims that she'd already killed people, and Eddie kept reinforcing Scarlett's delusions that what she was saying was completely okay. He needed her to help him in life, and especially to talk to girls he liked. Given that both lack empathy, guilt or remorse, they spoke about killing people with ease. Their targets were just things that were there to serve a purpose, to make the pair feel powerful and relevant. An important feature that Eddie brought to the group was his intelligence. Scarlett wrote that Eddie was a, quote, genius. No doubt he was clever when it came to his education, but it's clear that both utterly overestimated his level of intellect and common sense. So, for example, he wasn't savvy enough to know that sending text messages that murdering someone was not a sensible idea. However, Scarlett seemed to believe that with this intellectual heavyweight in her corner, there was no way they could get caught. Eddie would think of every angle so they could outsmart the police. With this level of praise, I'm sure that Eddie starts to believe the same thing. She's right, I am a genius. So you have a pair of marginalised, psychopathic children, one who's desperate to kill, to act on her homicidal fantasies in order to feel relevant and a sense of power, and then there's her little minion, who wants to please the person he relies on, but who also wants to feel powerful as well, with them believing they were so smart they could plan and carry out a murder to live out their fantasies without any chance of being caught. The pair compiled kill list after kill list that changed over time, but at the end of 2022, they fixated on Brianna. It's important to consider why the pair decided to kill her specifically. Much is made of Scarlett in this case, but I think when looking at this question, Eddie's motivations are more abhorrent, relatively speaking I mean. With him, he clearly had transphobic and homophobic attitudes. When he found out that Brianna was transgender, he automatically decided that she was disgusting, inferior in some way, less worthy of living. Messages between the pair are filled with his pathetic, derogatory language against a person who, it's important to point out again, he'd never met. If they were going to kill someone, that someone like her was ideal. So without even meeting Brianna, just knowing she was transgender, meant that he could dehumanize her in his mind and justify an act of extreme violence against her. And of course, this is the epitome of prejudice, making assumptions about someone and deciding they're inferior to you, or even less than human, based on some feature of them which, ultimately, has nothing to do with you, doesn't affect your life, and which you should just ignore, grow the fuck up, build a bridge, and get over it. The second element of why Eddie was more than happy to kill Brianna is because it was getting close to Valentine's Day, and there was a girly light. And so, Scarlett had said, if he helped her commit the murder, then she would speak to this girl. In the messages between the pair after the killing, Eddie at one point reminds Scarlett of what she agreed and asks when she's going to speak to this girl. So, as well as wishing to feel powerful, Eddie was willing to murder someone he'd never met, with him justifying they were worthy of death due to being transgender, but also he did it because he wanted help speaking to a girl he fancied. In this respect, his actions represent a hate crime, but also just his utter disdain for human life, with him willing to savagely murder a teenage girl because of his own prejudice and to progress his love life. Scarlett's motivation for choosing Brianna, I think, is far less clear and much more complicated. There was likely seeing Brianna as vulnerable and more easy to control and manipulate into a trap, but there was something else. With her, there's little evidence of transphobic attitudes. She did make a comment to Eddie about Brianna having male genitals, but this seems to have been to rile him, so they'd be more likely to agree to help her in the murder. Outside of this, Scarlett doesn't use discriminatory language. She repeatedly refers to Brianna as she. In fact, during the trial, it came out that Scarlett was attracted to Brianna, and apparently struggling with her own sexual identity. It also appears that Scarlett was jealous of Brianna, how she looked, how she acted, the fact that people liked her. In this respect, as well as wanting to feel powerful by killing someone, I think that Scarlett potentially chose Brianna to remove someone she was jealous of from the world, but also to avoid confusing emotions that she was experiencing regarding her new friend. Whilst the motivations for killing Brianna are different for each of the pair, the fact remains they were underpinned by utterly selfish reasons. They didn't care about the fact that her death would utterly devastate her family and rob the world of a young woman who was trying to battle her own demons, but was resolute in helping others with their own difficulties. As to how these two developed into these monsters, we cannot say. Little has been reported about their childhoods, aside from saying they grew up in happy homes, etc. However, I would be astonished if there wasn't some level of trauma or neglect behind closed doors, which contributed to what Scarlett and Eddie became. Much has been made in the press about them apparently being turned into killers because of the things they were watching, including online gore and mainstream violent movies. However, I, and many other people, watched similar things as a child. We have not become killers because that is not who we are. What they were watching simply built on something that was already there, likely giving them ideas of how to realize their fantasies, but not creating them. I've no doubt that both these children will grow up to be dangerous adults. A boy will become a man who is willing to kill due to his underlying feelings of hatred to those different from him, and if it means he can advance his own life. And a girl will become a woman who equates killing with power and relevance, who has aspirations of being a serial killer, and who potentially would rather kill someone than deal with uncomfortable feelings she may be experiencing. Society is safe from them for at least the next 2 decades, and I imagine their arrogance and bravado will crumble when they move to the adult estate in around a year's time. So, what's your thoughts on this case? Please leave your comments below, but as I said at the beginning, keep it respectful. Also, as a reminder, if you want to donate anything, then do so to a worthy cause. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. On a crisp autumn morning in 2019, the body of Samantha Davenport was discovered in the basement of her modest suburban home, the victim of a brutal and ritualistic murder. At the center of this horrifying tale was Josh Davenport, a 48-year-old insurance adjuster whose unremarkable life belied the shocking acts he would eventually commit. To his neighbors, Josh was a quiet, somewhat awkward man who kept to himself. Few could have imagined the turmoil brewing beneath his placid exterior, or the sinister forces that would ultimately drive him to murder. Josh Davenport's journey to becoming a murderer began long before he ever logged onto the dark web. Born in 1971 to working-class parents, Josh was a shy and introverted child who struggled to form meaningful connections with his peers. His father, a stern factory worker, showed little affection and often berated Josh for his lack of athletic prowess and social skills. His mother, though loving, was overwhelmed by her own struggles with depression and was unable to provide the emotional support Josh desperately needed. Throughout his school years, Josh found solace in books and computers, excelling academically but failing to develop the social skills necessary to navigate the complexities of human relationships. He graduated high school with honors, but opted to attend the local community college rather than venturing away from the familiar confines of his town. It was during his college years that Josh experienced his first taste of romantic connection. Samantha, a kind-hearted nursing student, saw past Josh's awkward exterior and was drawn to his intelligence and quiet sensitivity. Their relationship blossomed, and for a time Josh believed he had found the acceptance and love he had always craved. After graduation, Josh secured a job as an insurance adjuster at a local firm, while Samantha began her career as a registered nurse at a general hospital. They married in 1996, settling into a modest home not far from where Josh had grown up. For the first few years, their life together seemed idyllic, but cracks soon began to appear in their relationship. Josh's innate insecurity and fear of abandonment manifested as jealousy and possessiveness. He grew increasingly paranoid about Samantha's interactions with male colleagues and patients, often accusing her of infidelity without cause. Samantha, in turn, became frustrated with Josh's lack of emotional maturity and his inability to trust her. Their arguments grew more frequent and intense, driving a wedge between them that widened with each passing year. As he approached middle age, Josh found himself grappling with a profound sense of disappointment and failure. His career had stagnated, with younger colleagues passing him by for promotions. The dream of starting a family had long since faded, as fertility issues and the strain on their marriage made parenthood an increasingly distant possibility. By his mid-40s, Josh had become a shell of his former self. He went through the motions at work, returning home each evening to a house filled with tension and unspoken resentment. Samantha had grown distant, throwing herself into her career in volunteer work, leaving Josh to confront his loneliness and sense of inadequacy and solitude. It was in this state of desperation and vulnerability that Josh first turned to the internet as a means of escape. What began as harmless browsing of forums and chat rooms gradually led him to explore darker corners of the web, searching for something, anything, to fill the void that had consumed his life. Little did he know that this digital journey would lead him to the doorstep of a group that would exploit his weaknesses and set him on a path to unimaginable darkness. Josh's descent into the world of the dark web began innocuously enough. Late one night, unable to sleep and desperate for some form of human connection, he found himself browsing online forums dedicated to topics ranging from conspiracy theories to the occult. These digital spaces offered Josh a sense of anonymity and acceptance he had never experienced in his day-to-day life. As he delved deeper into these online communities, Josh encountered mentions of the dark web, a hidden part of the internet accessible only through specialized software. Initially, Josh's forays into the dark web were driven by curiosity rather than malice. He marveled at the vast array of information and services available, both legal and illegal. Josh's exploration of the dark web coincided with a particularly difficult period in his marriage. Samantha had recently received a promotion at work, which only served to highlight Josh's own career stagnation. Their arguments had become more frequent and bitter, often ending with Samantha sleeping in the spare bedroom. The dark web became Josh's refuge, a place where he could escape the failures and disappointments of his real life. It was during one of his late-night browsing sessions that Josh stumbled upon a forum. The site's black background and crimson text created an aura of mystery and danger that immediately captivated Josh. As he read through the posts, he found discussions of ancient rituals, dark powers, and the promise of transformation for those deemed worthy. Something about the forum's blend of occult knowledge and promises of personal empowerment resonated deeply with Josh. Here was a group that seemed to offer the sense of purpose and belonging he had craved his entire life. Despite a faint voice of caution in the back of his mind, Josh created an account and made his first post, introducing himself as a seeker of hidden truths. The response was almost immediate. Within minutes, Josh received welcoming messages from other members, each more effusive than the last. As he basked in the sudden attention and acceptance, Josh failed to recognize the predatory nature of the interest being shown in him. He had taken his first step into a world that would ultimately consume him, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy and horror. The forum was far more than just another dark web cult. It was a carefully constructed digital ecosystem designed to identify, manipulate, and exploit vulnerable individuals like Josh Davenport. At its core, the group presented itself as a modern mystery cult, blending elements of ancient paganism, satanic imagery, and New Age spirituality into a seductive tapestry of esoteric knowledge and promised power. The forum's structure was deceptively simple at first glance. New members like Josh started in the outer circle, known as the Seekers. Here they were encouraged to share their personal struggles and desires, all under the guise of seeking spiritual guidance. More experienced members, called guides, would respond with carefully crafted messages of support and understanding, gradually introducing the group's core beliefs and practices. As seekers proved their dedication through active participation and completion of assigned spiritual exercises, they could progress to the rank of initiate. This inner circle had access to more specialized sub-forums and one-on-one mentoring sessions with higher-ranking members. It was at this level that the true nature of the cult began to reveal itself, with discussions of blood rituals, sacrificial magic, and the accumulation of dark energies. At the pinnacle of the dark forum stood the enigmatic figure known only as the Crimson Prophet. This individual, whose true identity remained a closely guarded secret, was revered by cult members as a direct conduit to ancient and powerful dark forces. The Crimson Prophet's posts were rare but always impactful, written in a cryptic style that invited multiple interpretations and sparked fierce debates among the followers. Key members of the cult played specific roles in the indoctrination and manipulation of newcomers like Josh. There was Midnight Whisper, a self-proclaimed empath who excelled at identifying and exploiting emotional vulnerabilities. Darksage served as the group's lore master, weaving together mythologies and occult traditions to create a compelling narrative of secret knowledge. Shadowwalker acted as the cult's enforcer, subtly threatening those who showed signs of doubt or resistance. The beliefs propagated by the cult of the forum were a toxic blend of fatalism, elitism, and promised salvation through darkness. Members were taught that the world was inherently corrupt and that true power could only be achieved by embracing humanity's darkest impulses. The cult preached that certain individuals, their followers, were chosen by dark forces to bring about a new age of chaos and transformation. Rituals played a central role in the cult's practices. These began as seemingly harmless meditation exercises and symbolic gestures performed in front of webcams. However, as members progressed through the ranks, the rituals became increasingly extreme, often involving self-harm, sexual degradation, and eventually, acts of violence against others. Financial exploitation was another key aspect of the cult's operations. Members were encouraged to make offerings to prove their dedication, with higher ranks requiring ever larger financial commitments. As Josh Davenport delved deeper into the cult, he remained unaware of the full scope of the organization he had joined. Josh's progression from seeker to initiate was rapid, fueled by his desperate need for acceptance and his willingness to embrace the cult's teachings. He eagerly completed each assigned task, from meditation exercises focused on channeling dark energies to more disturbing activities like recording himself reciting blasphemous oaths in front of a makeshift altar. As Josh delved deeper into the cult's ideology, his behavior in the real world began to change noticeably. He grew more withdrawn at work, his performance slipping to the point where he received a formal warning from his supervisor. At home, the distance between him and Samantha widened into an unbridgeable chasm. When she attempted to discuss her concerns about his changed demeanor, Josh reacted with uncharacteristic anger, accusing her of trying to hold him back from his true potential. The rituals Josh performed grew increasingly extreme. What began as simple candle-lighting ceremonies evolved into bloodletting rituals, with Josh using a ceremonial dagger provided by the cult to make small cuts on his arms and chest. He meticulously documented these acts, sharing the images with his online mentors who praised his dedication and promised that greater power awaited him. Josh's physical appearance began to deteriorate as he neglected his health in favor of spending more time online. He lost weight. His skin took on a pallid hue and dark circles formed under his eyes from countless nights spent hunched over his computer screen. Samantha's pleas for him to seek help fell on deaf ears, as Josh convinced himself that she simply couldn't understand the profound transformation he was undergoing. As Josh progressed through the ranks of the cult, he was granted access to more exclusive areas of the forum. Here, he encountered discussions of even darker practices, including animal sacrifice and the harnessing of sexual energy for magical purposes. The turning point came when Josh was selected for a one-on-one digital audience with the Crimson Prophet. This rare honor filled Josh with a sense of pride and purpose he hadn't felt in years. As he sat before his computer, heart racing in anticipation, Josh felt that he was on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the universe. He had no way of knowing that this conversation would set in motion a series of events that would lead to tragedy and the destruction of everything he had ever known. The digital audience with the Crimson Prophet marked a critical juncture in Josh's descent into darkness. The encounter was carefully orchestrated to maximize its psychological impact, with Josh instructed to prepare his sacred space, don ceremonial robes, and engage in a preparatory ritual involving meditation and self-flagellation. "The prophet, you have been chosen," the message began. "You stand at the threshold of true power, but the path forward requires the ultimate sacrifice. Are you prepared to shed the last vestiges of your former self and embrace the darkness that will set you free?" Josh's fingers trembled as he typed his response. "I am ready, great prophet. Tell me what I must do." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. The Crimson Prophet began by reinforcing Josh's sense of specialness and destiny. They wove a narrative that recast Josh's life struggles as tests of worthiness, positioning him as a long-awaited messiah figure within the cult's mythology. The prophet then began to probe Josh's psyche, asking pointed questions about his relationships, particularly with Samantha. Josh, his inhibitions lowered by the intoxicating atmosphere of the encounter, poured out his frustrations and resentments. He spoke of feeling emasculated by Samantha's success, of the gnawing fear that she would leave him for someone better. With each confession, the prophet offered validation and twisted guidance. "Your wife is an anchor, holding you back from your true potential," the prophet declared. "She is a servant of the light, unconsciously working to suppress your growing power. As long as she lives, you can never fully embrace your destiny." The suggestion of violence was introduced gradually, cloaked in the language of ritual and sacrifice. The prophet spoke of ancient rites that required the offering of that which the aspirant held most dear. In Josh's case, the prophet asserted, this could only mean one thing: Samantha's life. By the end of the session, Josh's mind was reeling. The prophet left him with a set of detailed instructions for a ritual that would supposedly unleash his latent powers, a ritual that would culminate in Samantha's death. "Perform this rite, and you will be reborn as a living god," the prophet promised. "Fail and you will be cast out, forever unworthy of the gifts that could have been yours." As the prophet's avatar faded from the screen, Josh sat in stunned silence, the full weight of what he was considering crashing down upon him. A small part of him recognized the madness of what he was contemplating, but that voice was quickly drowned out by the chorus of his own insecurities and the seductive whispers of promised power. The week leading up to the fateful night was a blur of feverish preparation and mounting tension for Josh. By day, he went through the motions of his normal life, his colleagues and even Samantha unaware of the storm raging within him. By night, he meticulously gathered the components for the ritual as specified by the Crimson Prophet: black candles, a silver chalice, a ceremonial dagger with a bone handle, and various herbs and powders of dubious origin. As the designated date approached, Josh's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He barely slept, spending hours poring over the instructions he'd been given, memorizing the incantations and visualizing the act he was about to commit. Samantha, sensing the growing tension, made several attempts to reach out to Josh. She suggested counseling, tried to engage him in conversations about their future, and even planned a weekend getaway in a last-ditch effort to rekindle their connection. Josh rebuffed each overture, his mind already set on the grim task ahead. On the evening of October 15, 2019, Samantha Davenport returned home from her shift at the hospital, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet night with her husband. The house was dark as she entered, save for a faint flickering light emanating from the basement door. Samantha called out Josh's name, receiving no response. Concerned, she made her way down the basement stairs, unaware that she was walking into a nightmare. The scene that greeted Samantha was like something out of a horror film. The basement had been transformed into a macabre ritual space. Flat candles formed a large circle in the center of the room, their flames casting writhing shadows on the walls. Strange symbols had been painted on the floor and walls, in what looked disturbingly like blood. In the center of the circle stood Josh, clad in a black robe, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Samantha, what are you doing here?" Josh's voice was barely recognizable, a hoarse whisper that sent chills down Samantha's spine. "You weren't supposed to be home yet. It's not time." Samantha, frozen in shock and fear, struggled to comprehend the scene before her. "Josh, what is all this? What's going on?" Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the man before her with the husband she thought she knew. Josh's demeanor shifted, a cruel smile playing across his lips. "You're early, my dear, but perhaps this is meant to be. The Dark Lords work in mysterious ways." He gestured for Samantha to enter the circle. "Come, join me, be part of my ascension." As Samantha took a hesitant step backward, Josh lunged forward with surprising speed. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and dragged her into the circle. Samantha's screams were cut short as Josh clamped a hand over her mouth, forcing her to the ground. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. Josh, lost in the throes of his delusion, began to recite the incantations he had so carefully memorized. His voice rose and fell in an unnatural cadence as he called upon dark forces that existed only in the twisted mythology of the cult. Samantha fought desperately, but Josh's madness lent him an inhuman strength. He bound her wrists and ankles with cord, heedless of her muffled pleas and tears. As he reached for the ceremonial dagger, a fleeting look of doubt crossed his face. For a moment, the man Samantha had married seemed to resurface, horror dawning in his eyes as he realized what he was about to do. But the moment passed, Josh's features hardened once more as he raised the dagger high. "This is my sacrifice," he intoned. "With this offering, I claim my power and break the chains of my old life." The dagger plunged down, and Samantha's body jerked as the blade pierced her chest. Josh, lost in a frenzy of bloodlust and religious ecstasy, stabbed again and again. As Samantha's life ebbed away, Josh continued the ritual. He collected her blood in the silver chalice, anointed his forehead with it, and chanted the final words of the ceremony. He waited, breathless for the rush of power the Crimson Prophet had promised. Seconds ticked by, then minutes, but nothing changed. The basement remained silent, save for Josh's ragged breathing and the soft hiss of guttering candles. Slowly, terribly, reality began to assert itself. The magnitude of what he had done crashed over Josh like a tidal wave. He looked down at his blood-soaked hands, at the lifeless body of the woman he had once vowed to love and protect, and a wail of anguish tore from his throat. There was no power, no transcendence, only the stark horror of his actions. Josh collapsed beside Samantha's body, cradling her cooling form as sobs racked his body. He remained there through the night, muttering incoherent apologies and pleas for forgiveness to unhearing ears. The discovery of Samantha Davenport's body sent shockwaves through the quiet community. It was the Davenports' next-door neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Winters, who first raised the alarm. Concerned by the absence of any activity from the house and unable to reach either Josh or Samantha by phone, she called the police to perform a wellness check. Officer Mark Ramirez, a seasoned member of the town's police department, arrived at the Davenport residence at approximately 10:30 a.m. on October 15th. His knock went unanswered, but he noticed a faint, unpleasant odor emanating from the house. Following protocol, Officer Ramirez circled the property, finding the back door unlocked. The smell intensified as he entered, leading him to the partially open basement door. What Officer Ramirez discovered in the basement would haunt him for years to come. Samantha's body lay in the center of a crude occult circle, surrounded by burned-out candles and bizarre symbols. Josh sat nearby, catatonic and covered in dried blood, still clutching his wife's lifeless hand. The crime scene investigators who arrived shortly after were confronted with a gruesome tableau that seemed more fitting for a horror movie than a suburban home. Forensic analyst Dr. Lydia Chen later remarked that in her 15 years on the job, she had never seen a crime scene so ritualistic in nature. The investigation, led by Detective Sandra Morris, quickly focused on unraveling the mystery of Josh's apparent descent into madness. A search of the Davenport home revealed a laptop in Josh's study, which proved to be a crucial piece of evidence. Cyber forensics expert Alan Sung was brought in to analyze its contents. What Sung discovered was disturbing. Months of forum posts and private messages documenting Josh's involvement with the cult. The sheer volume of data was staggering, painting a clear picture of Josh's gradual indoctrination and the cult's deliberate manipulation of his vulnerabilities. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover other cases across the country with similarities to the Davenport murder. A pattern emerged of lonely middle-aged individuals being drawn into the cult and subsequently committing violent acts. Meanwhile, Josh Davenport remained in a near catatonic state, unresponsive to questioning and seemingly unaware of his surroundings. He was placed under psychiatric hold at the local mental health facility, where Dr. Elena Rodriguez took charge of his care. Initial evaluations suggested a complete mental breakdown, with Josh alternating between periods of unresponsiveness and bouts of hysterical rambling about dark lords and promised power. As the investigation progressed, the community struggled to come to terms with the tragedy. A candlelight vigil was held for Samantha, attended by tens of local residents. The breakthrough in the Davenport case came 3 months after the murder, following tireless efforts by a joint task force of local law enforcement and FBI agents. The key to unraveling the mystery lay in a series of encrypted messages recovered from Josh's laptop, which cyber forensics expert Alan Sung finally managed to decode. These messages revealed the true extent of the cult's operations and the sophisticated methods they used to manipulate vulnerable individuals. The cult's leadership structure was exposed, with the identity of the Crimson Prophet traced to a former psychology professor. Armed with this information, investigators coordinated simultaneous raids targeting key members of the cult. Crimson Prophet was apprehended at a remote compound where she had been living under an assumed identity. Josh Davenport finally emerged from his catatonic state. In a series of emotionally charged sessions with Dr. Rodriguez, he began to recount the events leading up to Samantha's murder. Josh's confession, filled with remorse and horror at his own actions, provided crucial details that helped prosecutors build their case against the cult leaders. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological tactics employed by the cult, while former members provided chilling accounts of their experiences. Josh Davenport, deemed mentally unfit to stand trial, was committed to a high-security psychiatric facility. His case became a focal point for discussions about criminal responsibility and the nature of culpability in cases of extreme manipulation. In the aftermath of the trial, lawmakers pushed for new legislation to combat online radicalization and protect vulnerable individuals from predatory groups. For the community, the resolution of the case brought a measure of closure, but the scars left by the tragedy ran deep. The Davenport house, once a crime scene and now a painful reminder, was eventually demolished. In its place, the community erected a small memorial garden dedicated to Samantha and other victims of the cult. Jaden Hartwell, a charismatic 45-year-old investment banker, and his wife Karen, a 42-year-old art gallery curator, were the epitome of success and refinement. Their sprawling 5-bedroom home, with its manicured lawns and luxury vehicles in the driveway, was the envy of their neighbors. For 15 years, the Hartwells had been pillars of their community. They hosted lavish parties, donated generously to local charities, and were active members of the country club. Their 2 children, Penelope and Atticus, excelled in their private school and extracurricular activities. To the outside world, the Hartwells appeared to be living the American dream. But beneath the veneer of perfection, a storm was brewing. In the spring of 2023, the facade began to crumble, revealing a tale of betrayal, illness, and revenge that would shock the community to its core. What followed was a series of events that would leave their friends, family, and neighbors questioning everything they thought they knew about the Hartwells. Jaden and Karen's love story began in the fall of 2003 at Northwestern University. Jaden, a senior majoring in finance, first spotted Karen at a campus art exhibition. She was a junior studying art history, her eyes sparkling with passion as she explained the nuances of a particularly striking abstract piece to a group of rapt listeners. Intrigued by her intelligence and beauty, Jaden approached her after the crowd dispersed. He introduced himself, Fumbling slightly over his words, Karen was charmed by his genuine interest in her work and his quick wit. They spent hours talking that night, losing track of time as they discovered their shared love of travel, fine cuisine, and classic literature. Their courtship was a whirlwind of romantic gestures and intellectual discussions. Jayden wooed Karen with surprise picnics in the university's botanical gardens, late-night study sessions that turned into deep conversations about their hopes and dreams, and weekend trips to explore the vibrant art scene. After graduation, Jayden landed a coveted position at a prestigious investment firm, while Karen pursued her master's degree in art curation. Despite their busy schedules, their relationship flourished. They supported each other's ambitions, celebrating every milestone and comforting each other through setbacks. In the spring of 2008, Jayden proposed to Karen atop the Willis Tower at sunset. He had arranged for a private dinner in the sky deck, surrounded by the twinkling lights of the city they both loved. Karen, overwhelmed with emotion, said yes without hesitation. Their wedding, held the following year at the Botanic Garden, was a lavish affair that blended Jayden's taste for luxury with Karen's artistic flair. Friends and family gathered for their union, many commenting on how perfectly matched the couple seemed. The early years of their marriage were filled with joy and ambition. They worked hard, saving money and building their careers. Jayden climbed the corporate ladder with determination, while Karen made a name for herself in her competitive art world. In 2011, they welcomed their daughter Penelope, followed 2 years later by their son Atticus. Parenthood brought new challenges, but also deepened their bond. They tackled sleepless nights and diaper changes as a team, their love growing stronger with each passing day. To all who knew them, Jayden and Karen Hartwell were the perfect couple, destined for a lifetime of happiness together. As the years passed and the Hartwells' success grew, subtle changes began to appear in their relationship. The first cracks in their seemingly perfect life emerged around 2018, coinciding with a significant promotion for Jayden. His new role as vice president at his firm came with a substantial pay increase, but also demanded more of his time and attention. Karen, who had scaled back her work at the gallery to focus on raising their children, found herself increasingly alone. The intimate dinners and weekend getaways that had once been a staple of their relationship became rare occurrences. Jayden was often absent, citing late nights at the office and frequent business trips. At first, Karen tried to be understanding. She threw herself into volunteer work and focused on the children's activities, telling herself that Jayden's dedication to his career was for the benefit of their family. However, as months turned into years, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed between them. Friends began to notice the strain. At social gatherings, Jayden and Karen no longer gravitated towards each other as they once had. Their playful banter was replaced by polite, almost formal interactions. Karen's smile, once radiant in her husband's presence, now seemed forced and brittle. Karen tried to bridge the gap, planning romantic evenings and family outings, but Jayden always seemed distracted, his mind elsewhere. When she expressed her concerns, he dismissed them, assuring her that everything was fine and that he was just under a lot of pressure at work. As 2022 drew to a close, Karen couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in her gut any longer. Something was wrong, and it went beyond the normal stresses of a busy life. Little did she know, the true extent of the trouble in her marriage was about to reveal itself in the most devastating way possible. The seeds of destruction for the Hartwell marriage were sown on a crisp autumn evening in September 2022. Jayden was attending a charity gala at the Art Institute, an event his wife would normally have accompanied him to. However, Karen had stayed home with a sick Atticus, leaving Jayden to represent the family alone. It was there that he first laid eyes on Brianna, a 32-year-old up-and-coming financial analyst who had recently transferred to the office of a rival firm. Brianna was everything Karen was not: young, ambitious, and unencumbered by family responsibilities. Her sleek black gown and confident demeanor caught Jayden's attention immediately. They were seated at the same table for dinner, and as the evening progressed, Jayden found himself captivated by Brianna's sharp wit and intimate knowledge of the financial world. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing effortlessly from market trends to personal anecdotes. For the first time in years, Jayden felt a spark of excitement, a reminder of the passion he had once felt in his younger days. As the gala wound down, they exchanged business cards, both lingering a moment too long as their fingers brushed. Jayden told himself it was purely professional interest, but the thought of Viviana lingered in his mind long after he returned home that night. Over the next few weeks, Jaden and Viviana began to meet regularly under the guise of networking and potential collaboration between their firms. Coffee meetings turned into working lunches, which evolved into after-work drinks. Each time, Jaden found himself sharing more personal details, confiding in Viviana about his frustrations at home and the pressures of his job. Viviana, for her part, was drawn to Jaden's power and success. She saw in him a potential mentor and perhaps something more. She listened to his troubles with sympathy, offering understanding and support that Jaden felt had been missing from his life. The line between professional and personal blurred rapidly. A late-night strategy session at Viviana's apartment became the catalyst for their first kiss. Overwhelmed by desire and the thrill of the forbidden, Jaden crossed a line he had never thought himself capable of crossing. As he drove home that night, guilt warred with exhilaration in his mind. He told himself it was a one-time mistake, that he would end it immediately. But as the days passed, he found himself unable to stay away from Viviana. What had started as a chance encounter was quickly developing into a full-blown affair, one that would have catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. In January 2023, while Jaden was deepening his involvement with Viviana, Karen received news that would shake the very foundation of her world. What she had initially dismissed as fatigue and stress-related symptoms turned out to be something far more sinister. After a series of tests and a biopsy, Karen was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. The day she received the diagnosis, Karen sat alone in the sterile exam room, her mind reeling as the oncologist gently explained the treatment plan. She felt numb, barely registering the doctor's words about chemotherapy, radiation, and survival rates. In that moment, all she wanted was her husband by her side. But Jaden was unreachable, his phone going straight to voicemail. When she finally broke the news to Jaden that evening, his reaction was a mixture of shock and what Karen perceived as detachment. He held her as she cried, murmuring words of comfort, but she couldn't shake the feeling that his mind was elsewhere. She attributed his distance to the stress of processing the diagnosis, never suspecting the true reason for his distraction. The following weeks were a whirlwind of appointments and decisions. Karen threw herself into researching treatment options and support groups, determined to face her battle with courage. Jaden accompanied her to doctor's visits and helped arrange for additional help with the children. But there was a palpable tension between them. Internally, Jaden was racked with guilt. The timing of Corinne's illness couldn't have been worse, coming just as his affair with Viviana was intensifying. He found himself torn between his duty to his wife and his growing feelings for his mistress. The stress of maintaining his double life while supporting Karen through her illness began to take its toll. As Karen prepared to begin her first round of chemotherapy, she reached out to Jaden for emotional support, hoping to reconnect with her husband in the face of this life-altering challenge. But the man she had once considered her rock now seemed distant and unreachable. Little did she know, the worst of his betrayal was yet to come. His winter melted into spring. Jaden Hartwell found himself living two entirely separate lives. By day, he was the supportive husband, accompanying Karen to chemotherapy sessions, managing the household and maintaining a facade of normalcy for their children. By night, he was Viviana's passionate lover, escaping into a world of excitement and freedom from the burdens of his family life. The guilt of his infidelity, compounded by Karen's illness, ate away at Jaden. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as an excuse to create distance from both women. Late nights at the office became his refuge, a neutral space where he could avoid confronting the reality of his choices. Karen, weakened by her treatments and focused on her recovery, initially attributed Jaden's absences to the demands of his job and the stress of her illness. She leaned heavily on her sister, Imogen, and a close-knit group of friends who rallied around her during this difficult time. They provided the emotional support that seemed to be lacking from her husband, though none of them dared to voice their concerns about Jaden's behavior. Meanwhile, Viviana grew increasingly impatient with the limitations of their relationship. She pressed Jaden for more of his time and attention, hinting at a future together. Jaden, unable to fully commit but unwilling to let her go, placated her with promises of a vacation together once things settled down at home. As Karen's treatment progressed, the strain began to show on the entire family. Penelope, now 12, became withdrawn and sullen, struggling to cope with her mother's illness and her father's constant absences. 9-year-old Atticus developed anxiety, clinging to Karen and dissolving into tears at the slightest provocation. The once happy home became a place of tension and unspoken resentments. Friends and neighbors began to notice the change in the Hartwell family dynamic. Whispers circulated at school pickups and neighborhood barbecues. Some speculated about the toll of Karen's illness, while others wondered if there was trouble in the marriage. Jaden's colleague, Dominic Faust, had seen him with Viviana at a restaurant across town, but kept his suspicions to himself, unwilling to add to the family's troubles. As summer approached, Jaden found himself walking an increasingly precarious tightrope. His performances at work, at home, and with Viviana were beginning to slip. He was irritable, distracted, and prone to mood swings. Karen, despite her weakened state, sensed that something was deeply wrong but lacked the energy to confront him directly. The breaking point was approaching, and it would come in a way that none of them could have anticipated. As Jaden planned his getaway with Viviana, he had no idea that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down around him. As July 2023 arrived, bringing with it a heat wave that blanketed in sweltering temperatures, Jaden Hartwell made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of his life and the lives of those around him. With Karen's chemotherapy scheduled to continue throughout the summer, Jaden announced that he needed to take a business trip to close an important deal in the Cayman Islands. Karen, pale and exhausted from her most recent round of treatment, nodded weakly at the news. She was too drained to question the timing or the necessity of the trip, simply asking him to call regularly to check on her and the children. Jaden felt a pang of guilt as he looked at his wife, but the guilt wasn't enough to deter him from his plans. In reality, there was no business deal. Jaden had arranged a week-long romantic getaway with Viviana, using his connections to book a luxurious private villa on a secluded beach. As he packed his bags, hiding gifts for Viviana among his clothes, he rationalized his actions. He told himself that he deserved this break, that the stress of the past months entitled him to some happiness. The moment Jaden and Viviana arrived at their tropical paradise, they threw caution to the wind. They spent their days lounging on the beach, sipping cocktails, and indulging in expensive meals. Their nights were filled with passion, both of them reveling in the freedom to be together openly. Jaden pushed thoughts of Karine and his children to the back of his mind, fully immersing himself in the fantasy of a life with Viviana. Back in their house, Karen's condition took a turn for the worse. The side effects of her latest treatment hit her hard, leaving her bedridden and feverish. Imogen moved in temporarily to help with the children and Karen's care. Growing increasingly frustrated with her brother-in-law's absence, she tried repeatedly to reach Jaden, but his phone went unanswered. It was Penelope who unwittingly set in motion the events that would expose Jaden's betrayal. Worried about her mother and angry at her father's absence, she decided to use the emergency credit card Jaden had given her to order flowers for Karen. When the card was declined, she called the customer service number, posing as Karen to inquire about recent transactions. The customer service representative, fooled by Penelope's act, revealed a list of charges from the Cayman Islands, luxury restaurants, high-end boutiques, and a jewelry store. Penelope, confused and upset, shared this information with her Aunt Imogen. Imogen, her suspicions finally confirmed, decided it was time to take action. She hired a private investigator, who quickly uncovered the truth about Jaden's business trip and his ongoing affair with Viviana. Armed with this information and evidence, Imogen sat down with Karen to reveal the extent of her husband's betrayal. With gentle words but unflinching honesty, she shared the evidence gathered by the private investigator. Photos of Jaden and Viviana together in the Cayman Islands, records of extravagant purchases, and time-stamped footage of them entering and leaving their villa. Karen listened in stunned silence, her fingers clutching the arm of her chair so tightly. As the full picture of Jaden's duplicity emerged, a myriad of emotions washed over her. Shock, anger, humiliation, and finally, a steely resolve. When Imogen finished speaking, Karen remained quiet for a long moment. Then, with a voice steadier than she felt, she asked, "What do we do now?" Imogen, relieved that her sister's response wasn't one of despair, replied, "Whatever you want to do, I'm here for you, no matter what." It was at that moment, with her sister's unwavering support and the harsh truth laid bare before her, that Corinne began to formulate her plan for revenge. She would not let cancer or her husband's betrayal define her. Instead, She would take control of her narrative and secure her future on her own terms. As Karen absorbed the crushing reality of Jaden's infidelity, a transformation took place within her. The initial shock and heartbreak quickly gave way to a cold, calculated anger. Despite her weakened physical state, Karen's mind sharpened with purpose. She realized that while cancer had threatened to take her life, Jaden had chosen to destroy their marriage. In the quiet hours of the night, as her children slept and Imogen kept vigil, Karen began to formulate her plan. She would not be a victim, not of cancer and certainly not of her husband's betrayal. With a clarity she hadn't felt in months, Karen decided to take control of her future, starting with the financial security Jaden had so carelessly jeopardized. The next morning, Karen contacted Ezra Cruz, a shrewd divorce attorney known for his ruthless approach to high-profile cases. In a private consultation, Ezra laid out Karen's options, explaining that given the circumstances, she had a strong case for an advantageous settlement. However, Karen had other ideas. With Ezra's reluctant guidance and Imogen's unwavering support, Karen set her plan in motion. She began by meticulously documenting Jaden's affair and his abandonment during her illness. Next, she reached out to her old contacts in the art world, discreetly inquiring about quick private sales for several valuable pieces in their collection. The most crucial and risky part of her plan involved their joint assets. Using her power of attorney, which Jaden had granted her years ago for emergencies, Karen began the process of liquidating their accounts. She worked tirelessly, making calculated moves to convert their investments into cash without raising immediate alarms. As she worked, Karen was fueled by a mix of righteous anger and a newfound determination to secure her children's future. She set up new accounts in her name only, transferring funds with precision. The family's vacation home in Michigan was quietly put on the market, sold to a cash buyer within days. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Karen maintained an outward appearance of a woman focused solely on her health. She continued her treatments, attended support group meetings, and even managed to keep up a normal routine for Penelope and Atticus. Only Imogen knew the full extent of Karen's actions, serving as both confidant and accomplice in her sister's bold plan. As the days passed and Jaden's return drew near, Karen felt a grim satisfaction. She had taken back control in the most profound way possible. Now, all that remained was to wait for the man who had betrayed her to come home and face the consequences of his actions. On a sunny Saturday afternoon in late July, Jaden Hartwell returned home from his Cayman Islands business trip, tanned and relaxed. As he pulled into the driveway of their Riverton mansion, he felt a twinge of guilt, knowing he'd have to slip back into the role of devoted husband and father. He had no idea that his carefully constructed double life was about to implode. Entering the unusually quiet house, Jaden called out for Karen and the children. The silence that greeted him was unnerving. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found a thick manila envelope on the counter, his name written in Karen's elegant script. With a growing sense of dread, Jaden opened the envelope. Inside, he found divorce papers, along with a letter from Karen detailing her knowledge of his affair and his absence during her cancer treatments. The final paragraph of the letter informed him that she had liquidated their joint assets, taking what she deemed her fair share after years of supporting his career and raising their family. Panic rising, Jaden rushed to his home office and attempted to log into their online banking accounts. Access denied. He called his investment manager, only to learn that most of their portfolio had been sold off over the past week. The vacation home sold. Their valuable art collection? Gone. As the reality of his situation sank in, Jaden sank into his leather office chair, his mind reeling. His phone buzzed with a message from Viviana, asking about their plans for the coming weekend. Jaden stared at the screen, the life he thought he wanted now seeming hollow and misguided in the face of everything he had lost. Just then he heard the front door open. Footsteps approached his office, too heavy to be Karen's. The door swung open to reveal Imogen, her face a mask of cold fury. She's here, Jaden realized, to ensure he understood the full magnitude of his mistakes and the consequences that were only beginning to unfold. Special agent of the FBI's white-collar crime division was assigned to investigate the case. Her team began the painstaking process of tracing the movement of the Hartwells' assets, looking for any signs of fraudulent activity or money laundering. What they uncovered was a complex web of transactions, all meticulously documented and, much to their surprise, entirely legal. Karen's use of her power of attorney had been within her rights, and she had been careful to keep her actions just within the bounds of the law. However, the investigation did bring to light some questionable financial practices on Jaden's part. His expense accounts revealed a pattern of lavish spending that extended far beyond his trip with Viviana. There were irregular cash withdrawals, undeclared gifts, and suggestions of attempts to hide assets offshore. As Agent Vega dug deeper, she uncovered connections between Jaden and several companies that had recently been under scrutiny for insider trading. While not directly implicated, the evidence suggested that Jaden had been walking a fine ethical line in his professional dealings. In the spring of 2024, nearly a year after the implosion of the Hartwell family, the case finally went to trial. Jaden's lawyers attempted to paint Karen as a vindictive woman who had overreacted to a simple indiscretion, illegally seizing assets in a fit of jealous rage. They argued that her actions had not only destroyed Jaden's life, but had negatively impacted their children and potentially compromised client funds at his firm. Karen's team, led by the sharp-tongued Cruz, methodically dismantled this narrative. They presented evidence of Jaden's long-term affair, his neglect during Karen's cancer treatment, and the paper trail of his own financial misdeeds. Witnesses, including Imogen and several of Jaden's former colleagues, testified to his erratic behavior and ethical lapses in the months leading up to the discovery of his infidelity. The most damning testimony came from Viviana Reyes, who, in exchange for immunity, revealed the full extent of her relationship with Jaden, including his promises to leave Karen and his dismissive comments about his wife's illness. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the case had evolved beyond a simple divorce proceeding. The judge, forced to consider the complexities of the situation, had to weigh not only the dissolution of the marriage, but also the potential criminal aspects of Jaden's financial dealings. After weeks of dramatic testimony and skillful legal maneuvering, the court prepared to render its verdict. Jaden, found guilty of multiple financial crimes, sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security prison. At the heart of this story are two couples. Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, both in their early 50s, had been fixtures of the community for over 2 decades. They were the couple everyone looked up to. Successful, well-respected, and seemingly happily married, their home was often the center of neighborhood gatherings. Just 3 houses down, the newly wedded Zara and Eric Donovan had recently moved in. Both in their mid-20s, they brought a youthful energy to the street that had long been dominated by older families and retirees. Their arrival was met with curiosity and warmth by their neighbors, particularly the Hawthornes. Little did anyone know that the lives of these 4 individuals would soon become entangled in a web of desire, obsession, and murder. What began as a daring experiment in sexual exploration would spiral into a nightmare that would leave one dead, one behind bars, and 2 others grappling with the consequences of their choices. This is the story of how a seemingly innocent proposition led to a brutal crime that would be splashed across national headlines and forever change the lives of those involved. It's a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary seeming individuals and the devastating consequences of stepping outside societal norms. Isabella Hawthorne had always been the golden girl. Growing up in Seattle, she was the captain of her high school cheerleading squad, prom queen and valedictorian. But Isabella was more than just a pretty face. She had a sharp mind and boundless ambition. She met Russell Hawthorne during her sophomore year at the University of Washington. Russell, 2 years her senior, was the star quarterback with a bright future ahead of him. Their courtship was the stuff of campus legend, the perfect couple that everyone envied. They married shortly after Isabella's graduation, with dreams of conquering the world together. Russell's promising football career was cut short by a knee injury in his first year as a professional player. He pivoted to sports management, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Isabella, meanwhile, pursued a career in marketing, her creativity and drive making her a rising star in the field. Their move coincided with the birth of their daughter, Lily. They threw themselves into parenthood and their careers with equal fervor. From the outside, they seemed to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But as the years went by, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Russell's work kept him away from home for longer stretches, and he began to put on weight. losing the athletic physique that had first attracted Isabella. For her part, Isabella found herself increasingly restless. With Lily away at college, the house felt empty, and her job no longer provided the satisfaction it once did. Isabella began to wonder if this was all there was to life. She started yoga classes and joined a book club, searching for something to fill the growing void she felt. She found herself envying the young couples she saw, with their passionate embraces and carefree laughter. When was the last time she and Russell had shared such moments? Russell, oblivious to his wife's discontent, continued his routine of long hours at the office, followed by evenings in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Their conversations became perfunctory, limited to discussions about bills, home maintenance, and occasional updates about Lily. As her 50th birthday approached, Isabella felt a growing sense of panic. Was this how she would spend the rest of her life? The woman who had once been voted most likely to succeed now felt trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. It was in this state of mind that Isabella first laid eyes on Eric Donovan. Young, handsome, with a lean swimmer's build, Eric represented everything that was missing from Isabella's life: excitement, passion, and the promise of adventure. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a stirring of desire. As she watched Eric and his young wife Zara move into the neighborhood, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that would change everything. Zara Donovan, born Zara Khalil, was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had settled in Portland 2 decades earlier. Growing up, she had always felt caught between two worlds: the traditional values of her parents and the liberal, free-spirited culture of the Pacific Northwest. With her olive skin, Zara stood out in a city that was predominantly white. From a young age, Zara showed a passion for art. Her parents, while supportive, always emphasized the importance of a practical career. As a compromise, Zara studied graphic design at Portland State University, finding a way to merge her creative instincts with a marketable skill. It was during her final year at PSU that Zara met Eric Donovan. She was working on her thesis project at a local coffee shop when Eric, a barista there, struck up a conversation about her sketches. Eric, with his easy charm and boyish good looks, immediately captured Zara's attention. Eric had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 boys in a working-class family. He'd moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and progressive culture. While he worked as a barista to pay the bills, his true passion was photography. His Instagram account, filled with moody black-and-white portraits in stark urban landscapes, had a modest but growing following. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within weeks of their first meeting, Eric and Zara were inseparable. They spent their days exploring Portland's hidden gems, secret gardens, underground art galleries, hole-in-the-wall music venues. Eric introduced Zara to urban exploration, and she in turn taught him about Lebanese cuisine and culture. To Zara, Eric represented freedom and self-expression. He encouraged her to pursue her art without compromise, to break free from the expectations of her family and society. With Eric, Zara felt seen and understood in a way she never had before. For Eric, Zara was his muse and his anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering support gave him the confidence to pursue his photography more seriously. He began to book small gigs, weddings, local band promotional shots, even a few magazine spreads. Their decision to get married came as a surprise to many who knew them. Both sets of parents expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, but Eric and Zara were convinced they had found their soulmates. They had a small ceremony in a sculpture garden, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The move was a practical decision. As freelancers, they needed a space that could serve as both home and studio. The quiet suburb offered affordable housing, close enough to the city for work opportunities. They saw it as the perfect place to start their life together, envisioning lazy Sunday mornings in their backyard and cozy evenings planning their future. Little did they know that their new neighborhood held secrets and temptations that would test the strength of their young love. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, neither Eric nor Zara could have imagined the turmoil that lay ahead, or the devastating consequences their choices would have. The annual summer block party was a tradition that dated back decades. Every year on the last Saturday of August, Sycamore Lane would transform into a bustling fairground of sorts. Neighbors would bring out grills, coolers full of drinks, and folding tables laden with potluck dishes. Children would run around with water guns and bubble wands, while adults caught up on neighborhood gossip and sipped cold beers. This year's party held a special significance for the residents of Sycamore Lane. It was the official welcome for the Donovans, the street's newest additions. Isabella Hawthorne, as the unofficial social director of the neighborhood, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Zara and Eric felt welcomed. As the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, Isabella made her way to the Donovans, who were standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Isabella, you look lovely," Russell called out as she walked past, her sundress floating around her legs. She flashed him a smile, but her eyes were already fixed on Eric. "Eric and Zara, welcome to the neighborhood," Isabella said warmly, air kissing Zara's cheeks and letting her hand linger perhaps a moment too long on Eric's arm. "We're so glad you could join us." The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by the fruity sangria Isabella had brought along. Zara found herself drawn into a discussion about local art galleries with some of the other neighbors, while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. "You have a beautiful home," Eric commented, his eyes roving over the house. Isabella beamed with pride. "Why, thank you," she replied. "You should see the inside. We recently renovated the master bathroom. Perhaps I could give you a tour sometime. Get you some ideas for your own place?" The flirtatious undertone in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. Eric, slightly taken aback but not displeased, felt a flush creep up his neck. Before he could respond, Russell appeared, clapping a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Hope my wife isn't talking your ear off, son." Russell chuckled. Isabella shot him a look that mixed annoyance and affection. "Actually, she was just offering to show me your renovation," Eric said, his voice slightly strained. As the evening wore on, the two couples found themselves gravitating towards each other. Zara, charmed by Russell's dad jokes and genuine interest in her artwork, found herself relaxing for the first time since moving in. Isabella, meanwhile, hung on Eric's every word as he described his photography projects. By the time the party wound down, seeds had been planted. Seeds of attraction, curiosity, and temptation that would soon grow into something none of them could have anticipated. It was a week after the block party that Isabella first broached the subject with Russell. They were in bed, the TV droning in the background, when Isabella turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. Isabella broached the subject with Russell one night as they lay in bed. Her voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of excitement as she asked if he had ever considered spicing up their love life. Russell, half asleep, mumbled incoherently at first. Isabella pressed on, clarifying that she meant specifically in the bedroom. This caught Russell's attention and he became suddenly alert. Cautiously, Russell asked what exactly she had in mind. Isabella took a deep breath before suggesting they try swapping partners with another couple. The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Russell stared at his wife, trying to determine if she was serious. As he realized she was, a mix of emotions played across his face: shock, intrigue, and a hint of arousal. Over the next few days, the Hawthorns had numerous discussions about Isabella's proposition. Russell, initially hesitant, found himself warming to the idea. The thought of being with a younger woman stirred something in him he thought had long since died. It was Isabella who finally suggested the Donovans. They're young, attractive, and new to the area, she reasoned. They might be open to something like this. Approaching the younger couple proved to be a delicate matter. It was at a neighborhood barbecue that Isabella, emboldened by several glasses of wine, pulled Zara aside. The conversation was awkward at first, with Isabella dancing around the subject, but once the proposition was laid out, Zara's reaction surprised her. Instead of outrage or disgust, there was curiosity in the younger woman's eyes. The evening of the swap arrived with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. The Hawthorns had suggested using their home, citing their finished basement as a perfect, private setting. As Zara and Eric walked up the driveway hand in hand, Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but she could see the apprehension in his eyes as well. Isabella greeted them at the door, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. The forced casualness of the situation was palpable as they made small talk over glasses of expensive red wine. Russell busied himself with the stereo, filling the room with soft jazz in an attempt to ease the tension. After what seemed like an eternity of awkward conversation, Isabella finally stood up. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "shall we?" They had agreed beforehand on the pairings, Isabella with Eric, Russell with Zara. As they split off, Zara couldn't help but glance back at Eric, a moment of uncertainty passing between them. But then Eric disappeared down the hallway with Isabella, and Zara found herself alone with Russell. Russell led Zara to the guest bedroom, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Despite his earlier bravado, he felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. It had been years since he'd been with anyone other than Isabella. Zara, sensing his hesitation, took the initiative. She reached up and kissed him softly, then more passionately. Russell responded, his hands exploring her young, firm body with growing confidence. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Isabella was living out the fantasies she'd been harboring since she first laid eyes on Eric. His youthful energy and enthusiasm more than made up for any lack of experience. Isabella felt desired, beautiful, alive in a way she hadn't in years. Eric, for his part, was intoxicated by Isabella's confidence and sensuality. As the encounters reached their climax, a series of emotions washed over each participant. Excitement, pleasure, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness all mingled together in a confusing cocktail. Afterwards, as they all reconvened in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. The reality of what they had done seemed to hit them all at once. Zara couldn't meet Eric's eyes, focusing instead on smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Russell cleared his throat several times, but couldn't seem to find any words. Only Isabella seemed truly at ease, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was Eric who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, his attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That was something. The tension broke and nervous laughter filled the room. They made stilted small talk for a few more minutes before the Donovans made their excuses and left. As Zara and Eric walked home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, they were unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their relationships. Back in the Hawthorne house, Isabella hummed to herself as she cleaned up, already thinking about the next time. Russell watched her, a nagging feeling of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. None of them realized that this night was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. In the days following the swap, life seemed to return to normal, but beneath the surface, changes were brewing, particularly in Eric Donovan. Eric found himself unable to stop thinking about Isabella. The encounter had awakened something in him, a hunger he'd never experienced before. He began to find excuses to be outside when he knew Isabella would be leaving for work. He'd wave, trying to appear casual, but his eyes would linger on her long after she'd driven away. Zara noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Eric seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he was either too tired or not in the mood. Their once passionate lovemaking became infrequent and mechanical. One afternoon, Zara came home early from a client meeting to find Eric's photography workspace in disarray. As she began to tidy up, she noticed something odd. Hidden beneath a stack of prints was a folder filled with photos of Isabella. Some were clearly taken from a distance, capturing Isabella gardening, getting her mail, or walking to her car. Others were more intimate, zoomed-in shots through windows, Isabella in various states of undress. Zara felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a harmless crush or the after effects of their encounter. This was something much more sinister. Meanwhile, Isabella had begun to notice Eric's increased presence in her daily life. At first, she was flattered by the attention, even reciprocating with flirtatious glances and accidental touches when they'd run into each other. But as the days wore on, Eric's behavior became more erratic and intense. He began sending her messages at all hours, alternating between passionate declarations of love and angry accusations when she didn't respond quickly enough. Isabella tried to let him down gently, explaining that their encounter was a one-time thing, but Eric refused to accept it. One night, Isabella woke to the sound of something hitting her bedroom window. Peering out, she saw Eric standing in her front yard, a handful of pebbles in his hand. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto hers. "I can't live without you, Isabella," he called out, his voice breaking. "We're meant to be together." Isabella quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing. She woke Russell, who grumbled as he went to confront Eric. By the time Russell made it outside, Eric had disappeared into the night, leaving only a crumpled bouquet of flowers on the front step. As Isabella lay awake that night, she realized with growing horror that her exciting sexual experiment had unleashed something dark and dangerous. She had no idea how right she was, or how tragic the consequences would be. Over the next few weeks, Eric's behavior spiraled further out of control. His obsession with Isabella consumed every aspect of his life. He neglected his photography business, spending hours stalking Isabella's social media accounts and driving by her house. Zara watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone she barely recognized. Isabella, for her part, vacillated between fear and a perverse excitement. Part of her was terrified of Eric's growing instability, but another part, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, was thrilled by his obsessive attention. It made her feel desirable, powerful in a way she hadn't in years. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Isabella returned home to find Eric sitting in her living room. "How did you get in here?" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Eric smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that sent chills down Isabella's spine. "You gave me a key, remember? For watering the plants when you were on vacation." Isabella's mind raced. That had been months ago, before the swap, before everything had gone wrong. She should have asked for it back. Why hadn't she asked for it back? Eric stood, moving towards her with predatory grace. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice low and intense. "About us, about our future together." Isabella backed away, fumbling for her phone. "There is no us, Eric," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." But Eric kept advancing, his eyes wild with a mixture of love and madness. "You don't mean that," he insisted. "I know you feel what I feel. We're destined to be together, Isabella. I won't let anyone come between us." As Eric reached for her, Isabella let out a scream. The sound seemed to snap Eric out of his trance. He blinked, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. Without another word, he brushed past Isabella and out the front door. Shaking, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. She knew she should call the police, but what would she say? That she'd willingly slept with her young neighbor, and now he was stalking her. The thought of the scandal, of everyone knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. Little did Isabella know, her silence would have devastating consequences. For in his twisted mind, Eric took her failure to report him as a sign of her secret love, and he was determined to eliminate any obstacles standing in their way, no matter the cost. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Isabella was alone in her house, Russell having left for a golf game with friends. She was in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when she heard the back door open. Isabella called out with a trembling voice, asking if it was Eric. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her heart racing, Isabella grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it out in front of her like a shield. When Eric appeared in the doorway, his eyes were glazed and unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. He slurred that he had seen Russell drive away, declaring that now they could be together as they were supposed to be. Isabella pleaded with Eric, telling him he needed help and that this wasn't right, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Eric wasn't listening. He lunged forward, trying to grab Isabella. She shrieked and swung the knife wildly, connecting with Eric's arm and drawing blood. The sight of his own blood seemed to enrage Eric further. He roared an insult at her and charged again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife clattered to the floor. Eric's hands found Isabella's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Isabella clawed at his face, gasping for air as her vision began to darken around the edges. In desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Eric's groin. The blow caused him to double over in pain, releasing his grip on her throat. Isabella scrambled away, her fingers closing around the handle of the fallen knife. As Eric straightened up, his face contorted with rage, Isabella acted on pure instinct. She thrust the knife forward, feeling it sink into Eric's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Eric looked down at the knife protruding from his body, a look of surprise replacing the anger on his face. Then slowly he crumpled to the floor. Isabella stared at Eric's still form, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. The quiet of the community was shattered by the wail of sirens as police cars and an ambulance converged on the Hawthorne residence. Neighbors poured out onto their front lawns, watching in shock as paramedics rushed into the house, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to find a distraught Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by officers. Her hands and clothes were stained with blood, her eyes wild with shock and fear. As Reeves approached, he overheard snippets of Isabella's statement. She was saying that Eric had attacked her, that she had no choice, and expressing shock and disbelief at what she had done. Reeves took charge of the scene, ordering a thorough search of the house and surrounding area, while crime scene technicians combed through the kitchen. Photographing the bloody knife and the signs of struggle, Reeves turned his attention to the neighbors. Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Reeves approached her gently, introducing himself as Detective Reeves and confirming that the victim was her husband. Zara nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. When Reeves pressed her about when she had last seen Eric, Zara managed to choke out that it had been that morning. She explained that Eric had said he was going for a walk, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process the situation. Unable to continue, she broke down sobbing. Reeves made a note in his pad before moving on to question other neighbors. As he gathered more information, a story began to emerge of a quiet neighborhood rocked by an unthinkable crime. As the body of Eric Donovan was wheeled out on a gurney, covered by a sheet, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The look in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes, a mixture of relief and guilt, told him that unraveling the truth would be a complex and delicate process. In the days following Eric's death, Detective Reeves dove deep into the lives of both the Hawthornes and the Donovans. What he uncovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies that painted a very different picture from the initial reports of a random break-in. Interviews with neighbors revealed whispers of an illicit affair between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records showed an overwhelming number of calls and messages from Eric to Isabella in the weeks leading up to the incident, many of which had gone unanswered. But it was the discovery of Eric's photography studio that blew the case wide open. Hidden among his professional equipment, detectives found a camera with a high-powered zoom lens and memory cards filled with hundreds of photos of Isabella, many taken without her knowledge. When confronted with this evidence, Zara broke down. Through tears, she revealed the truth about the partner swap and the subsequent obsession that had gripped her husband. She spoke of Eric's erratic behavior, his neglect of their marriage, and her own fears about his mental state. Isabella, faced with the mounting evidence, finally confessed to the full story. She admitted to the affair and the stalking, but maintained that the final confrontation had been self-defense. Russell, devastated by his wife's infidelity, nonetheless stood by her side throughout the ordeal. As Reeves pieced together the events that led to that fatal Sunday afternoon, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. What had begun as a misguided attempt to spice up a stagnant marriage had spiraled into an obsession that cost a young man his life and forever changed the lives of all involved. The case, once thought to be a straightforward home invasion, was now revealed to be a complex tale of desire, betrayal, and deadly obsession. The prosecution painted Isabella as a bored housewife who initiated an affair with a younger man, then killed him to keep her indiscretion secret. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the convenient absence of her husband on the day of the killing. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Simone Jeffries, argued passionately that Isabella was a victim of stalking and harassment who acted in self-defense. They presented evidence of Eric's obsessive behavior and called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Zara's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. Her emotional account of Eric's descent into obsession and her own fear for Isabella's safety swayed many jurors. "She's not the monster they're making her out to be," Zara said through tears. "Eric, he wasn't himself at the end. What happened is a tragedy, but Isabella was as much a victim as anyone." In his closing arguments, the prosecutor urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion. "The facts are clear," he insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne made a series of choices that led to this tragic outcome. She must be held accountable." Simone Jeffries, in her rebuttal, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Put yourself in Isabella's shoes," she implored. Terrified, alone, confronted by a man who had been stalking her for weeks, she did what anyone would do. She fought for her life. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The fate of Isabella Hawthorne and the final judgment on this suburban tragedy now rested in their hands. Isabella Hawthorne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. As Isabella was led away from the courtroom, the impact of the tragedy on all involved was palpable. Russell Hawthorne, his face haggard from the stress of the trial, watched his wife disappear through the courtroom doors. Despite the revelations of her infidelity, he had stood by her throughout the ordeal. Now he faced the prospect of years alone, grappling with the consequences of their ill-fated experiment. Sarah Donovan, widowed and alone, retreated from public life. The trauma of losing Eric and the public exposure of their private lives left deep scars. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of haunting paintings that would later be hailed as a powerful exploration of grief and betrayal. The residents struggled to come to terms with the events that had shattered their peaceful community. The Hawthorne and Donovan houses stood empty, constant reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories. Those who stayed found their trust in one another irrevocably altered. On October 15, 2021, police responded to a distress call from an apartment complex on Oak Street. What they discovered inside would haunt them for years to come: the lifeless body of 32-year-old Ethan Reed, a beloved local high school teacher, lying in a pool of his own blood. The prime suspect? His girlfriend of 2 years, 29-year-old software engineer Olivia Rogan. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing web of surveillance, manipulation, and escalating control that had ensnared Ethan in the months leading up to his death. Hidden cameras, meticulously placed throughout his apartment, told a silent tale of paranoia and obsession. Olivia Rogan's path to becoming the central figure in a tragic true crime story began long before she met Ethan Reed. Born in 1993 to Margaret and James Rogan, Olivia grew up in a middle-class suburb of Portland. From an early age, those close to the family noted Olivia's intense need for attention and validation. Margaret Rogan, in an interview following her daughter's arrest, reflected on Olivia's childhood. She was an exceptionally bright child, always at the top of her class, but she struggled to form lasting friendships. Margaret recalled, "I thought it was just shyness at first, but as she got older, I noticed how possessive she could be of the few friends she did make. If they spent time with other children, Olivia would become sullen and withdrawn." This pattern continued into Olivia's teenage years. Her high school boyfriend, Alex Chen, later told investigators about Olivia's constant need to know his whereabouts. "She would call or text incessantly when we weren't together," he said. "If I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd show up wherever she thought I might be. At the time, I thought it was just because she cared so much." Despite these interpersonal challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class and went on to study computer science at Stanford University. It was here that Olivia's controlling tendencies found a new outlet in the world of technology. Her college roommate, Sarah Jennings, remembered Olivia's fascination with coding and surveillance software. "She was brilliant at it," Sarah said, "but sometimes it felt like she was using her skills to keep tabs on everyone around her. She'd casually mention things about our classmates that she couldn't possibly have known without some kind of digital snooping." After graduating with honors, Olivia landed a prestigious job at a tech startup. Her colleagues described her as driven and meticulous, often working long hours to perfect her code. However, her personal life continued to be marked by tumultuous, short-lived relationships. Jason Tran, who dated Olivia for 6 months in 2019, described the relationship as intense and suffocating. "She wanted to know everything about my day, my thoughts, my plans," he said. "When I tried to set boundaries, she'd become angry or manipulative. It was exhausting." By the time Olivia moved back to Ashland in early 2020, accepting a remote position with her company, she had left a trail of broken relationships behind her. Yet those who knew her couldn't have predicted the dark turn her life would take when she met Ethan Reed. Ethan Reed's life stood in stark contrast to Olivia's tumultuous journey. Born in 1990 in Ashland, Ethan was the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. His older sister, Amanda Reed, described their childhood as idyllic. "We grew up surrounded by nature, spending our summers hiking in the mountains and our winters skiing. Ethan was always the peacemaker, the one who could make anyone laugh." From an early age, Ethan showed a passion for learning and a natural ability to connect with others. His high school English teacher, Mrs. Elaine Hoffman, remembered him fondly. Ethan had a way of bringing out the best in his classmates. He was patient, kind, and had an infectious enthusiasm for literature. "I always thought he'd make an excellent teacher someday," Mrs. Hoffman's prediction proved accurate. After graduating from the university with a degree in English literature, Ethan returned to his hometown to teach at Ashland High School. Ethan's personal life was characterized by steady, long-term relationships. His college girlfriend, Laura Simmons, remained a close friend even after their amicable breakup. Ethan was always so balanced, she said. He valued his independence, but was also incredibly loyal and supportive. We broke up because our career paths were taking us in different directions, but there was never any drama. The fateful meeting between Olivia Rogan and Ethan Reed occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in May 2020 at a local farmer's market. Olivia, still adjusting to life, had ventured out to explore her new surroundings. Ethan, a regular at the market, was picking up fresh produce for the week. Their eyes met across a display of organic apples, and Ethan, ever the friendly local, struck up a conversation about the best varieties for baking. Olivia, charmed by his easygoing nature and warm smile, found herself lingering at the stall far longer than she'd intended. As they chatted, they discovered a shared love of classic literature and hiking. Ethan, impressed by Olivia's quick wit and intelligence, suggested they meet up for a hike the following weekend. Olivia, feeling an instant connection, eagerly agreed. Their first date was a hike up to Grizzly Peak, offering breathtaking views of the Rogue Valley. Ethan's friend Mark later recalled, Ethan came back from that hike on cloud 9. He couldn't stop talking about how smart and funny Olivia was, how they'd talked for hours without a lull in the conversation. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan's relationship blossomed rapidly. They spent long evenings discussing books, sharing meals, and exploring the natural beauty of southern area. To those around them, they seemed like a perfect match. However, even in these early honeymoon days of their relationship, there were subtle signs of Olivia's possessive nature. Ethan's sister Amanda noticed that Olivia seemed to monopolize his time. She'd call or text constantly when they weren't together, and she always seemed to have a reason why Ethan couldn't join family gatherings without her. Ethan, blinded by the excitement of new love, brushed off these early red flags. When his friend Mark expressed concern about the intensity of the relationship, Ethan laughed it off. "She's just excited about us," he said. "It'll calm down once we're more settled." Little did Ethan know that this was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually tighten around him, slowly cutting him off from the life he had built and the people who cared about him most. By the fall of 2020, Olivia had all but moved into Ethan's apartment. Despite him never officially asking her to live with him, she began to exert influence over every aspect of his daily life, from what he ate to how he spent his free time. Ethan's colleague and friend, fellow English teacher Jessica Lawson, noticed changes in his behavior at work. He started turning down invitations to after-school happy hours, something he'd always enjoyed before. When I asked him about it, he said Olivia wasn't comfortable with him being out late, Jessica recalled. It seemed odd, given that she knew most of us and had even joined us a few times. Olivia's control extended to Ethan's social media presence. Friends noticed that his usually active Facebook and Instagram accounts became sparse, with posts becoming infrequent and impersonal. When questioned, Ethan would brush it off, saying he was trying to be more private online. But it was Olivia's attempts to isolate Ethan from his family that raised the most alarm bells. Amanda Reed remembered a particularly disturbing incident during the 2020 holiday season. "We always have a big family Christmas at our parents' house," she said. For that year, Ethan called at the last minute to say he and Olivia couldn't make it. When I pressed him, he said Olivia wasn't feeling well and he needed to stay with her. But I could hear her in the background, sounding perfectly fine. Olivia employed a variety of emotional manipulation tactics to maintain her grip on Ethan. She would oscillate between lavishing him with affection and subjecting him to cold, silent treatments if he didn't comply with her wishes. Ethan's friend Mark recounted a camping trip they had planned for months. "The night before we were supposed to leave, Ethan called to cancel. He sounded so defeated. He said Olivia was upset he was going away without her, even though she'd been invited and had declined. As 2021 progressed, Olivia's behavior became more erratic. She began accusing Ethan of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support her claims. She would show up unannounced at the high school, ostensibly to bring Ethan lunch. But colleagues noted how she seemed to be scanning the room, as if looking for signs of inappropriate behavior. Ethan's student Emma Chen later testified to a disturbing encounter. Ms. Rogan came into our classroom during lunch break. Mr. Reed wasn't there, but she stayed anyway, asking us questions about him. It felt really weird and invasive. Despite the mounting evidence of Olivia's controlling behavior, Ethan remained committed to the relationship. Those close to him noted his increasing stress and anxiety, but he would deflect their concerns, often making excuses for Olivia's actions. His sister Amanda confronted him directly in the summer of 2021. "I told him I was worried, that this didn't seem like a healthy relationship," she said. But he just got defensive. He said I didn't understand Olivia, that she'd been hurt in the past and needed extra reassurance. He truly believed he could help her overcome her insecurities. As Olivia's paranoia and need for control reached new heights, she made a decision that would irreversibly alter the course of her relationship with Ethan and ultimately lead to its tragic conclusion. In late August 2021, while Ethan was away at a weekend teaching conference, Olivia took the drastic step of installing hidden cameras throughout his apartment. The idea had been brewing in Olivia's mind for weeks. Her background in software engineering made the technical aspects of the plan feasible, and her growing suspicions about Ethan's fidelity provided the justification she needed to overcome any moral qualms. Olivia meticulously planned the operation, purchasing small high-definition cameras disguised as everyday objects, a smoke detector, a phone charger, even a potted plant. She also set up sophisticated software that would allow her to access the feeds remotely from her laptop or phone. On the Friday afternoon that Ethan left for his conference, Olivia sprang into action. She had a key to his apartment, ostensibly for emergencies, which gave her unfettered access. Over the next several hours, she carefully placed cameras in the living room, kitchen, bedroom, and even the bathroom, ensuring every corner of Ethan's private space was under surveillance. With the cameras in place and the software running smoothly, Olivia left the apartment, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and guilt. She told herself that this was a necessary step, that it would allay her fears and allow her to trust Ethan completely. The first few days of monitoring proved uneventful. Olivia watched as Ethan went about his daily routines, grading papers, preparing lessons, chatting on the phone with his sister. But rather than easing her suspicions, the lack of incriminating evidence only fueled Olivia's paranoia. She began to obsess over minor details. Why did Ethan smile at that text message? Who was he waving to out the window? Olivia's colleague, David Cho, later recalled noticing changes in her behavior at work during this time. She seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone. I caught a glimpse of her screen once. It looked like a video feed, but she quickly closed it when she saw me looking. As the days turned into weeks, Olivia's obsession with the camera feeds grew. She began neglecting her work, her sleep suffered, and her interactions with Ethan became increasingly strained as she struggled to keep her secret. One evening, while reaching for a book on his shelf, Ethan noticed that several volumes were slightly out of place. He distinctly remembered organizing them just days before. In the bathroom, his toiletries seemed rearranged, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly how. More unsettling were the times he felt as if he was being watched. He'd be grading papers in the living room and suddenly feel a prickle on the back of his neck, as if someone's eyes were on him. But when he looked up, he was alone. Ethan's friend and fellow teacher, Jessica Lawson, recalled a conversation they had during this period. He mentioned feeling on edge in his own home, she said. He laughed it off, saying he was probably just stressed about work, but I could tell it was really bothering him. Olivia's behavior added to Ethan's growing discomfort. She began making comments about his daily activities that she shouldn't have known about. Once, she mentioned in passing that she liked the new brand of coffee he'd bought, despite not having been to his apartment in days. Another time, she asked about a phone call he'd had with his mother, though he was certain he hadn't mentioned it to her. When Ethan would express confusion about these slip-ups, Olivia would quickly change the subject or provide vague explanations. He must have mentioned the coffee in passing, she'd say, or perhaps his mother had told her about the call. As his unease grew, Ethan found himself second-guessing his own memories and perceptions. Am I just being paranoid? He wondered. Is the stress of work getting to me? Despite his attempts to rationalize the strange occurrences, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. He began to pay closer attention to his surroundings, noting any changes or oddities in his apartment. He even considered confiding in his sister Amanda, but hesitated, worried that his suspicions might sound absurd or that he might be overreacting. The moment of revelation came on an October evening in 2021. Ethan had been grading papers late into the night, the soft glow of his laptop illuminating the living room. As he stretched and prepared to call it a night, his elbow knocked a small potted plant off the side table. The pot shattered on the hardwood floor, soil and ceramic shards scattering across the room. As Ethan knelt to clean up the mess, something caught his eye amidst the debris. A tiny lens, no bigger than a pencil eraser, glinted in the low light. His heart racing, Ethan carefully extracted the object from the soil. It was a miniature camera, expertly concealed within the plant's base. The discovery sent a chill down Ethan's spine. With trembling hands, he began a frantic search of his apartment. Over the next hour, he uncovered 5 more hidden cameras. In the smoke detector, a picture frame, even the shower head. The realization that his most private moments had been under surveillance was overwhelming. Ethan's mind reeled as he pieced together the implications. The strange comments Olivia had made, her uncanny knowledge of his daily activities, the feeling of being watched, it all suddenly made horrifying sense. The woman he had loved and trusted had violated his privacy in the most intimate way possible. In a daze, Ethan called the one person he knew he could trust implicitly, his sister Amanda. It was past midnight, but she answered on the second ring, immediately alert at the sound of distress in her brother's voice. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. Through a voice choked with emotion, Ethan recounted his discovery. Amanda listened in shocked silence, her initial disbelief quickly turning to anger on her brother's behalf. As Ethan's story unfolded, Amanda's protective instincts kicked in. "You need to get out of there," she insisted. "Pack a bag and come to my place. We'll figure this out together." But Ethan was torn. Part of him wanted to confront Olivia immediately, to demand answers and explanations. Another part was simply numb with betrayal, struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such a gross invasion of privacy. In the end, it was Amanda's steady voice that guided his next actions. "Document everything," she advised. "Take pictures of the cameras, save any recordings you can find. We'll go to the police in the morning." As the first light of dawn broke over Ashland, Ethan sat on his couch, surrounded by the dismantled remains of Olivia's surveillance network. His phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Good morning, babe. Sleep well?" The irony of her feigned normalcy was not lost on Ethan. With a deep breath, he typed out a response that would set in motion the final tragic act of their relationship. "We need to talk. Come over as soon as you can." The tension in Ethan's apartment was palpable as Olivia arrived later that morning. She entered with her usual smile, leaning in for a kiss, but froze when she saw Ethan's grim expression and the array of dismantled cameras on the coffee table. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Olivia's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "Ethan, I can explain," she began, her voice quavering. But Ethan, his voice low and controlled, cut her off. He spoke of trust betrayed, of the sanctity of privacy violated. With each word, Olivia seemed to shrink, her usual confidence evaporating in the face of her exposed deception. When Ethan finally fell silent, Olivia launched into a desperate justification of her actions. She spoke of her deep-seated insecurities, her fear of losing him, her conviction that if she could just prove to herself that he was faithful, she could finally relax into their relationship. Her words came out in a rush, pleading and explanatory, but Ethan remained unmoved. "I can't be with someone who would do this," he said firmly. "We're done, Olivia. I want you to leave." Olivia's demeanor changed in an instant. Her tears dried up, replaced by a cold, hard look. "You can't do this to me," she hissed. "We're perfect together. You're overreacting." As Ethan stood firm in his decision, Olivia's pleas turned to threats. She spoke of ruining his career, of telling his students and colleagues about embarrassing moments she'd captured on camera. When these threats failed to sway Ethan, she resorted to emotional manipulation, threatening self-harm if he left her. Throughout it all, Ethan remained resolute. Even as his heart broke at the sight of Olivia's desperation, he knew with a clarity that surprised him that there was no coming back from this betrayal. Finally, seeing that her words were having no effect, Olivia stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind her. Ethan sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. He thought the worst was over. He had no idea that Olivia's desperation was about to take a far more dangerous turn. The events of October 15th, 2021, would forever be etched in the memories of Ashland's residents. The day began like any other, with no indication of the tragedy that would unfold. Ethan, emotionally drained from the confrontation with Olivia, had called in sick to work. He spent the morning talking with his sister Amanda, making plans to file a police report about the hidden cameras. As evening approached, he decided to take a walk to clear his head, leaving his phone behind to avoid any desperate messages from Olivia. It was during this absence that Olivia made her final fatal return to Ethan's apartment. Neighbors would later report seeing her enter the building, her face set in a mask of determination. She used her key to let herself in, her mind racing with a mix of anger, desperation, and a twisted sense of righteous indignation. When Ethan returned home around 7 p.m., he found Olivia waiting for him in the darkened living room. The sight of her there, uninvited and unexpected, sent a jolt of fear through him. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice wary. Olivia's response was chilling in its calmness. "We're going to fix this, Ethan," she said. "You'll see that we belong together." What followed was a heated argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Olivia vacillated between pleading for another chance and lashing out with bitter accusations. Ethan, his patience exhausted, demanded that she leave immediately. It was then that Olivia's fragile control snapped. In a move that would shock even those who knew of her obsessive tendencies, she produced a kitchen knife she had taken from Ethan's own drawer. The next few moments were a blur of violence and terror. Ethan, caught off guard by the sudden escalation, tried to reason with Olivia, even as he backed away from the blade. But Olivia, beyond the reach of reason, lunged forward. In the struggle that ensued, Ethan's training as a former high school wrestler came into play. He managed to grapple with Olivia, trying to disarm her without causing harm. But in her frenzied state, Olivia's strength seemed superhuman. Neighbors would later report hearing shouts and the sound of breaking glass. One, concerned by the commotion, called 911, but help would arrive too late. By the time police broke down the door of Ethan's apartment, the tragic scene had already played out to its grim conclusion. They found Ethan on the floor with multiple stab wounds marking his body, the life already fading from his eyes. Olivia sat beside him, the bloody knife still clutched in her hand, her gaze vacant as she stared at what she had done. As paramedics rushed in, futilely attempting to save Ethan's life, Olivia offered no resistance when the police took her into custody. Her only words, repeated over and over like a mantra, were, "He was supposed to love me forever." The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Nguyen of the Ashland Police Department, quickly uncovered the full extent of Olivia's surveillance operation, revealing months of invasive monitoring. This digital trail, along with physical evidence from the crime scene and witness statements, painted a damning picture of obsession and premeditated violence. Ethan's family and friends were devastated. His sister Amanda, in particular, struggled with guilt. "I knew something was wrong," she said in a tearful interview. "I should have pushed harder, done more to get him away from her." As the investigation progressed, more details of Olivia's troubled past came to light. Former colleagues and ex-boyfriends came forward with stories of her controlling behavior and emotional manipulation. Her parents, shell-shocked by their daughter's actions, could only offer tearful apologies to Ethan's family. The district attorney presented a methodical case, walking the jury through the progression of Olivia's obsessive behavior. The recovered surveillance footage played a central role, starkly illustrating the invasion of Ethan's privacy. The defense didn't contest the basic facts of the case. Instead, they focused on Olivia's mental state, bringing in expert witnesses to testify about her history of attachment issues and borderline personality disorder. They argued that Olivia's actions were the result of a mental health crisis, not premeditated murder. Olivia herself took the stand, her testimony an unsettling mixture of remorse and rationalization. She spoke of her deep love for Ethan and her fear of abandonment, claiming that she never meant to hurt him. Her apparent lack of full comprehension of the gravity of her actions left many in the courtroom disturbed. After a 2-week trial and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges of first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, the judge delivered a scathing indictment of Olivia's actions before sentencing her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Ashland slowly healed, the community was left to reflect on the nature of love, trust, and the human capacity for both compassion and cruelty. The case would be remembered not just for its shocking conclusion, but as a catalyst for change and a somber reminder of the importance of recognizing and addressing toxic relationship dynamics before they escalate to tragedy.